Nope, scratch that. Now it looks like we're live. I definitely did forget to unmute myself. That has never happened before. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Airier, and here we'll check out the next episode of Warhammer vs. Star Wars 40K. There are words in there that make a sentence. Not the one I intended. Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K. Star Wars 40K is a very different fanfiction project, which admittedly I've heard is insane and also may or may not be a meme passed around and not actually something written down. I'm not entirely sure. I was terrified to find out. Either way, this is episode 43, The Lords of Catastrophe. I'm excited about this one because I saw, just having to mute the audio and then scan through the images for thumbnails, we're getting 1313 back, and that was a bit of an interesting scene he was in at the moment. So, yeah. Shovel enthusiasts unite. We're going to Krieg-ish, sort of. Not really. You know what I mean. Yeah, so I'm really excited about this one. More importantly, well, actually not even slightly as important because this is really freaking important. I also just want to throw up that never using that phrasing again, for one. And also, I'm currently starting to sell minis that I've printed. Here's one of the first examples. You could actually find it right now. I have an eBay link down below. So far, we have a barbarian. There's a few other sculpts that could come up. For example, we have a... Yeah, I got an entire little drawer of them right here. Yeah. We also have a skeleton. This one isn't up for sale yet. I'm going to put up a poll to see who goes next. If I can get this thing to actually zoom in on him. There's a lot of detail on this guy. If he will let me zoom. Zoom, damn you. Zoom. There we go. So we got the skeleton. And a kobold merchant. Yeah, I love the completely zooming function of the camera. There we go. Yeah. These are all 3D sculpts. The skeleton and the kobold will go up as a random poll to see which one they want next. I'm going to see who, well, wants what first. There's also a few other models I'm working on. A few knights and a giant isopod that is, comparatively to this guy, about this much bigger. Height-wise and this much longer. It is a massive print, and I'm actually looking forward to trying it out, but I want to get everything else done, because that's going to take a couple days to get out. So yeah, if anyone's interested in getting the early barbarians, there's a few up for sale right now. I have the eBay link in the description. Yeah, I'm trying to sell minis, because I like them, and this is an excuse to print them out, paint them, and then get rid of them in a way that doesn't involve... I don't know, storing them infinitely in a way that my wife may or may not be okay with, considering I have no room left and I need a way to get rid of them. Yeah, you're basically feeding my addiction to painting minis at this point. Thank you. More importantly, I just want to jump in, see what's going on in this episode, because I've heard a lot of people going, oh, this is great, and if I say any more, it will be a spoiler. And as I've said many times before, when people are conscientious online, it means things are going to go really crazy really fast. So I'm excited. Let's just do it. Yoink. That's the wrong one. There's the right one. Okay. Jumping into this one. For some reason, I forgot I was subscribed to him. It's like, I am, but I don't know why. Yeah, that's weird. Also, if anyone here hasn't subscribed to Fan, why? Fix that. All right. I gotta jump a little forward in case there's any music he plays.
Have seen
you. Lords of Catastrophe. Very fancy choice of font.
His hand was steady.
Directly back to
the
Krieg.
aim down his arm as rigid as a lance. The man on the end of it did not plead for his life, did not appeal for mercy or even rationality. It was that, among a handful of other things, which enabled 1313 to spare his life. At least, for the moment. It may not have seemed to matter a great deal. They were all going to die before this was over. But there was a significant difference between death in the line of duty and death as a form of execution. Yeah. The young man was not this flesh. He was not this body that held him. He was duty, and he was the honor of Krieg, and even more than that, he was a sinner. He was born a sinner. His mother a machine of contrivance, his father's the duality which raged within him.
Yeah, because the mentality of Krieg is based on guilt for the previous sins, which admittedly the entire Imperium doesn't care about, but they do, and they're more than welcome to let Krieg believe it because it gets them all the shock troops. Yeah.
Chairman Vinsark, Colonel Yurton, both bearing the tattered standards of his origin within his flesh, and more importantly, within his soul. He was penance caging sin, a contrition to last 100,000 generations.
1 second. Sorry, I hate sneezing on stream.
His blood was filthy, and only duty and death within that duty could cleanse him of that impurity. He was unworthy of life. He had known this since his eyes first opened.
Fan is building up the standard Krieg line here, but he's already shown 1313 as someone who has a reason to live, and may or may not have a Cadian he may or may not have a crush on. I mean, other than all the death flags concerning the virus bomb. I'm wondering how this is going to go, because it sounds like he's building up the duty aspect right now, but why is he specifically building up the duty? Because we all know Cadians, his audience would know Cadians, he has to have to build it, so he's highlighting it for some purpose other than to recap.
He lived only to die. That was the ultimate truth of the sons of Krieg. For Krieg had sinned, and that sin was in him, as well as the will to redeem it. 13, please don't do this, she begged him, not pleadingly, not pathetically, but desperately. Straight as his arm was, so too was the long last pointed directly into the side of his head. But it was not the fear of death that affected him in those moments, and she was begging to save his own life as much as that of her captain. The words, spoken by Corporal Emiliana, stung him deeply, quaked him to his core.
But
unlocked. That core was buried deep and held firm in a grasp as cold and rigid as the bunkers of his homeworld. The tremors she sent to that place did not, could not, reach to the surface, and no sign of his pain reflected on the bare face of the 15-year-old soldier. Nothing she could say would change the need for his duty to be done. General Order 99 was absolute, and it was not for him to choose his superiors nor to judge their orders. Commissar Shadrick was what he was who he was, and both of those things were a Captain Commissar who had been sent to this place to take command of the Guard. Though for a time, he had entertained that Lazarus as a saint could hold command, that illusion could only stand until challenged.
Or until Lazarus isn't in the picture, which is literally what's going on right now, because he's not there to countermand the orders. The annoying part about this is the same annoying part from when this little confrontation happened. Technically, Krieg is in the right on this one. The Inquisitor, acting through Shadrick, has absolute privilege to give orders, with very few exceptions. And depending on how the other Inquisitors work, I'm not sure Samael or the third one who we saw briefly, and I already forgot the name of, might have absolutely no say with them either. So, short of a captain, or not a captain, but a chapter master coming in right now, I don't think that would help. And frankly, the Red team, he is not going to do that because I don't think he gives a damn about saving anyone. It's just, hey, more dead bodies for a single press of the button. Neat. The only downside would be they're not his dead bodies. It would be someone else's dead bodies. I get the impression that he's basically a world eater who hasn't actually acknowledged what that means yet. Yeah, he's a loyal one. I know there's someone out there going, but that's not the case. I realize that. But functionally, it's really close.
The edicts born of the Reign of Blood left no room for interpretation. There was no place for the ecclesiarchy within the command structure of the Astera Militarum. This was law.
And debatable. It's law until you get Big G talking, and then, you know, talking through religion actually makes sense because that's the usual people who can still get some contact.
And if not a saint, then Saint Lazarus was not but a sergeant, and a sergeant could not challenge a commissar captain.
He's not even a sergeant anymore.
The orders were clear. The chain of command was clear. The place where his duty lay was clear. But that did not mean that carrying it out did not pain him, nor that Emiliana's pleas did not cut him. To the contrary, and to his great surprise, they cut him deeply. The look in the eyes of the Cadians, who themselves were restrained by orders given, bore into him in a way he had never expected to feel. It all hurt terribly. He had felt pain, felt the dying of his flesh. Even now, he lacked an eye taken by Republic blaster fire.
And an arm.
Even now, he lacked an arm shorn from him by mechanical mercy. Even now, his wretched body was spotted by a million bruises and scrapes, burns, and cuts.
Okay, I'm going to go on a writing tangent on this one. What Fan's doing here is the rule of three, which I frankly abuse all the time. It's where you want to make emphasis of a point, and you just say, even now, even now, even now. And he then lists the various building increasingly, well, damaged parts of himself, going from the eye to the arm to his very body, which admittedly is mostly bruises, but he's also talking about his body being not his flesh earlier on to establish that the body just being wretched despite everything on top of that. Yeah. But I don't think he really needs to do it right now because he's already alliterated quite a bit in the opening reiteration of the Krieg mantra about how they are not here to make choices. They are the sinners trying to redeem themselves, essentially. This is more just a timing thing. I mean, I think it's not a bad option, but because he's already reiterated that, I think Fan could have cut this out and instead of using rule of three, just listed them off in a different manner. This is a very small nitpick on my end. I just think it would have sped up the tempo a slight bit, but that also could be why he didn't do it. So my impatience to see what's about to happen might be somewhat tempering my judgment on this one, assuming I have judgment to start with, which thank you for those who believe that. It could be argued either way on this, and I could be brought around to the other opinion, but I think it probably would be more effective if he had just gone from his eye to his arm directly to there without the reiteration of even, because that would make it a little more punchy. That's my personal opinion. Sometimes you need to slow it down, but I think he's already established that slowing of the pace, considering this entire moment is probably within the last seconds of happening, if even that much time has passed. It's just words that have come out and very little else.
But he had never felt this pain before. It was new. It was a penance, he tried to tell himself, but it did not feel that way. It felt like a
betrayal?
punishment.
13, answer me! We shed blood together. We fought the replicate together. I saved your life, and you saved mine. The least you owe me is an answer!
She demanded again. He tried to. He opened his mouth, but suddenly realized he could not speak. He knew the words. They were in his mind even now. Matter-of-fact answers, as logical as math. General Order 99 had been issued. The Commissar claimed the authority of the Inquisition. All further thoughts were worthless. All further action, heretical. It should have been so easy to say. But as he looked into the back of Captain Stern's head, his pistol pressed against it, even as the man kneeled on the ground before him, Corpsman 1313 found he was at the very edge of his strength, and he hadn't even realized it until now.
Oh.
He could not look away. His eye, his intact eye, hurt, his vision fogging. What was this pain? This weakness?
He's crying, isn't he?
His hand was almost trembling. His heart was beating faster than it should. Was he sick? Was he cursed? Corporal, you will be silent, or you will be kneeling alongside the former captain. I'll have your honors stripped from you, and your shame will carry to your family and sisters in the Scola.
Oh, he's talking to Emiliana. For some reason, I thought he was talking to 1313, even though he said corporal. Also, can we just acknowledge Fan is doing a great job at making Shadrick sound absolutely dickish. Like, he sounds like someone who needed to be punched in the face, and already was at least once.
"Do not make me address you again," said the Commissar, who, even then, was approaching stern.
I mean, admittedly, if she just happened to have her hand slip and shot the Commissar in the face, would anyone really care? I mean, Krieg would, but it'd probably be better Shadrick would die.
Face scrunched in an attempt to hide his ugly smile. It was not a successful attempt. 1313 said nothing, even as he felt another sting strike him, this time from the Commissar. Again, it was something he should not have felt, and he puzzled over the burning sensation in his chest as the aftermath of the words settled in. Anger? Insult?
So he's feeling sad and ashamed of himself for betraying Emiliana, but he doesn't realize that. And he's taking offense on her behalf because Shadrick is Shadricking all over the place.
He was taking offense for Emiliana.
Yep.
A person who was not even he himself. A person who was not even from Krieg. Why? 13. I didn't know you were a coward.
Ooh.
Came the rueful whisper from the corporal, incited by his own silence, and another lance of painful emotion shot through him, moving like a ghost's own hand and ignoring his coat, armor.
I think if someone here knew more about Krieg, the most damaging thing they could say, and which fans should in no way actually use because it'd be way too specific, is pointing out how they're just following orders, like the traitors on Krieg followed the secession. It would be a completely useless thing for anyone outside of Krieg to say because it's old history no one cares about, except for Krieg. And again, it's the reason why it would have absolutely no sense to say it right now. But it would be such a good cutting line. But again, it would make no sense for anyone to say that.
And uniform. Whether or not Shadrick heard her was unclear, as he was distracted a moment later as Sergeant Vett approached, his gun discarded and laying on the ground, showing he was no threat as he neared.
Does he have a knife?
Instead, in his hand was a short-range Vox receiver and broadcaster, the green, squat, blocky device raised forward as he walked. "Far enough," said the Commissar Captain, and one of his remaining men aimed a gun at Vett, who froze, but continued to hold the Vox out. "It's a message for you, sir. Message for the man in command," Vett next reported, and his phrasing, more than anything else, purchased the man his chance.
Because he appealed to Shadrick's obscene sense of self-worth and pride. He's like, ooh, I'm in command and you acknowledge it. Oh, I hope he dies in this episode. I mean, I hope he died multiple episodes ago, but we're not all that lucky. Admittedly, Fan did a great job making an enemy that you just despise. Unfortunately, he also did a great job at making an enemy you just despise. It's not like the Chapter Master of the Crimson... the Chapter Master of Red Team, who is horrible, but also kind of awesome and cool at the same time. It's not like some of Palpatine's bullshittery where you just love to hate him and he's so grandiose and it's horrible, but you love him as a villain. It's just more that petty dweeb dumbass who got over-promoted and full of himself because I have power. Respect my authority. No, actually, Cartman might be more competent. And isn't that a fucked up thought?
Shadrick smirked and jerked his head forward. The man
I'm sure he
aiming the
jerks a
weapon at
lot.
Vex coming closer and
He jerks all over the
snatching
place.
the device from his
Not how I meant that. Can we just pretend I didn't say that?
hand, moving back towards Shadrick once he had confirmed it was not some kind of hidden explosive. "I am not a coward. I do not fear death," 1313 managed
Fears
to
life,
say
though.
as this played out before them, keeping his voice strong and even, but low. He wanted to look at her as he said it, but he couldn't. His muscles were bunched too tightly at his neck. His heart was beating painfully. Every beat was like a pump of cool, yet searing poison, acting as an internal demand. A demand that he simply die right here and right now.
We've safer for
And
you.
yet, why? He could not understand it. This pain that now assailed him without wounding. All around him, he was doing no different from all of his brothers, all soldiers of sin, fighting to die in order to restore the honor of Krieg and the almighty God Emperor. The silent men of Krieg stood in...
What?
All soldiers of sin, fighting to die in order to restore the honor of Krieg and the almighty God Emperor.
That is an interesting take, because he already showed and said flat out that he's willing to say that a saint would stand up in the pecking order more, but he's being forced to acknowledge that the pecking order is unofficial if it involves a saint, and he has the official one which doesn't. Actually, he was wrong, because he apparently was still considering Lazarus a captain or a major or a corporal or whatever he was, a sergeant. And either way, it wouldn't matter, because he didn't have any of those at the time. He's only saint now, which admittedly on the religious side matters more. But if he's talking about restoring the honor of the God Emperor, there are a few figures who are suddenly disengaged who might be able to talk him down then on the religious side. Unfortunately, I don't think any of them are in a place where they could get here or have any reason to go, because they might not know about it. I guess it really depends on the Vox cast who is going to right now.
The silent men of Krieg stood in ranks, guns aimed, unafraid of potential return fire as they targeted the Cadians in the room. The other Imperial soldiers aimed right back at them, though most did so from cover. Yet none on either side fired, all obeying orders of a kind. Did the other corpsmen, his brothers in every way, not feel this pain as well? Did their hearts not ache as his did?
Nope.
And why?
They don't have enough to do it.
Why did it hurt at all?
No, you don't fear death. You run towards it.
That's Krieg for you.
You crave it like a shard addict.
Emiliana continued to say, voice whispering angrily.
That's Krieg.
That is what makes you cowards. You are so afraid, so unwilling to use what the Emperor has given us all, that you cannot wait to die.
She's completely right, too. That is actually how Krieg works. And also why commissars have a really big disorientation when they go there, because it's not forcing people to work, it's trying to badger them into not dying.
Dead, her long lass still aimed into the side of his head. The Vox communicator was delivered to Shadrick, and he placed it to his ear, pressing the right button as he did to accept the communication.
This is Captain Commissar Shadrick, in command of the Astra Militarum forces at the Basilica of Salvation. What is your report?
He said into it. The Commissar was not prepared for the booming reply that came out from the device, which Vetnex had set to its loudest, speaker-like setting prior to handing it over.
Okay, just giving him a little prop on that one. Dicking over the guy who probably just put it up to his ear or his face close enough they could hear, and then having the sound just blast him off. It's just a good way to undermine him just a small bit more. Would it matter to Krieg? No. Would it matter to all the Cadians and everyone else who doesn't want to die to a virus bomb? It's just that little bit of fuck this guy that I really do appreciate.
Setting the Commissar had been unable to anticipate. In truth, it was more unexpected than loud, but in the tense silence of the room, it rung out clearly so that all could hear.
Vesuvian?
This is Saint Lazarus.
Oh.
The angels of death are here. The Emperor's angels have descended. We're all retreating back to the Basilica right now. Commissar, I need you to prepare
said the grainy but recognizable voice of the newly anointed Imperial Saint. Shadrick did not listen to much of it, dropping the Vox and crushing it with a powerful stomp of his armored boot.
Because that is a good reason to say that maybe his orders don't sound real. And even though we know they are, you could always make the argument, would the Inquisitor intentionally kill off a bunch of Space Marines uselessly? I mean, the answer we all know on the outside is yes, but would anyone on the Imperium side know that? I mean, I don't know. Actually, I really don't know. I'm not sure how much detail they've gone into about how much they know about the Inquisitors around them.
I do not take orders from a sergeant. The Commissar snarled contemptuously. You, Vetnex, back in line, he added, pointing a crooked finger at the sergeant, whose face creased, but nodded, doing as he was ordered to.
Commissar,
said a Krieger who stood nearby. What is your number, soldier? Shadrick snapped back.
The Krieger raised his gun barrel as he hefted it and saluted.
1,541, sir.
The masked man said, "What do you want, 1,541? Asked the
Why did he ask
Commissar
the name?
Captain.
Permission to voice an opinion, sir.
The fuck? I get 1313 having opinions right now, but I'm not used to the idea of other Kriegers who haven't been shown explicitly to have character development to have that much individuality to do that. That is actually a little shocking.
Requested 1521.
Verify
Permission
that he's not
denied.
bullshit.
Resume your duty. Ordered Shadrick, and the Krieger nodded without hesitation and resumed aiming his weapon.
Yeah,
The
that sounds
instant
right.
obedience brought a smile to Shadrick, helping him recover his mood and resuming his approach before he was standing above Captain Stern. Before long, Commissar Shadrick was kneeling, stripping Captain Stern of his...
Because technically they stripped Shadrick of his rank. No, they didn't strip him of his rank, just his position. Damn it, I thought I found a workaround, but no, Fan wrote that one correctly, damn it.
weapon and sidearm, holstering his own gun to heft Stern's glowing plasma pistol. A Cadian relic.
Maybe if we're very lucky, it's a Cadian relic that's about to go boom in your hand.
1313 could not see the man's face, but he knew it must be fixed in an unpleasant expression as he silently endured the humiliation.
You are terrified of sinning. You are terrified of doing anything but dying. You are terrified of the price of living.
Emiliana continued to hiss.
You are so afraid that all of you, your entire regiment, is jumping at the first chance to murder yourselves. All because that man has given you the authority to be what you were trained to be. Cowards! We haven't lost yet. The God Emperor sent back St. Lazarus to save us. He promised that help was coming, and it is. But you have no real faith. Just a death wish that you think will absolve you.
She accused him. These
And
were
it's accurate.
worst of all, because deep within, he knew they were true, and that truth was surfacing like some hideous beast from the ocean of his spirit. How he longed to be freed of his fear, to finally enter death, to be granted grace and forgiveness by the loss of his own life, to become incapable of wrongdoing, to finally be judged for this test, this cursed life, to at long last be over. No one had ever called it fear before, but it was. Yet now there was something else taking root inside him,
Doubt?
rising as the Commissar rose with his new trophy.
This is the definition of the easy way out. You don't fear pain or injury. You fear your own free will, your emperor-given mind. You're terrified of it just because it might lead you to a mistake. You ignore the fact that every single Imperial hero didn't allow themselves the luxury of an easy death.
Goddamn, Fen, you are spitting with these lines from Emiliana right now. Like, legitimately, she's doing exactly what she needs to undermine him by pointing out the flaw and the fallacy of the entire Krieg mentality. Which, admittedly, the Administratum, if they were actually still around, would not really appreciate, because they like a bunch of shock troopers who absolutely want to die. It's just fun, if anything. It's like, okay, so we get how much, and you're just going to do this willingly? Like, we're not asking of it, you're just willing to do this? Yeah, it's one of the few times someone wants to give more than they have to. So yeah, that's a thing. But also, normally I would say because Shadrick had explicitly said, do not speak. But we then acknowledge and fan lampshade that by, even though he's listening, he's then tuning her out because she kept speaking. And in the impression of 1313, he noted that Shadrick just didn't hear her. So anything she says after that can be said just blatantly as if he would hear it, but Shadrick is either not hearing it or not paying attention, which admittedly, knowing his characterization, not paying attention is probably more accurate. I'm wondering what the other Kriegers who might hear this are, because I don't know how far the room carries or how far away he's standing from them, because I think he was with the Cadian contingent first. Oh shit, Fan, you're helping your mom with surgery, so the DMs must wait. I hope your mom's okay, man. Also, hey, thanks for getting the chat. But also, hope your mom's okay. Ooh.
They were brave enough to think. They dared sin and found salvation. They did it in the face of death because they knew that even an easy death is...
Emiliana was saying, her voice now dripping
But-
fear of her own, desperation thick in every word. But 1313 finished her words for her, speaking before he even realized that the words were escaping him.
What is he going to say,
No
though?
death at all, he whispered, shocks of ice rolling through him, image of desperate. Emiliana was
face of death because they knew that even an easy death is...
death at all, he whispered, shocks of ice rolling through him, images of his limited past flashing through his conditioned mind. Emiliana said no more, and he still did not have the strength in him to turn and regard her, so he knew not what expression she turned on him then. The Commissar turned an eye on them, noticing their chatter, but his attention
Not
was
caring.
called away an instant later. "It's done, Commissar," said one of the tech adepts by the hanging bombs control panel. Seemingly in response to his word, panels opened up all along the enormous weapon. Thick armor and plates rearing back to reveal vibrant green canisters, each one a vial of the Death Eater virus, the plague which would devour this world.
And just because I always find this fascinating, at least some versions of the Death Eater virus are explicitly just a gray goo. Yeah, they're not actually biological. They are actually nanomachines that destroy and eat and consume everything. It's why you get ash afterwards. That's the byproduct. Or some of them. I'm sure at this point some of them are actual viruses that are maybe psychically induced. It's kind of like how some of the volcano cannon weapons were made before the creation process literally involved the psychic screams of a destroyed planet. Yeah. That's always the fun thing. Words don't always mean what they should in 40K, because how things were done at one time when they didn't have the magic-y stuff and how they were done later when they did have the magic-y stuff were slightly different. So they might have two things called the same thing and not be the same. I'm wondering how Fan's going to play this, because I think he's playing more of the biological side, but maybe he's playing more of the it's actually just nanomachine son side.
But 1313 did not look up to see it, did not crane his head behind his body to gaze upon the death of them all. All he could do was stare into the back of Captain Stern's head, and the Imperial Aquila that was tattooed there. The eye of the twin-headed eagle gazed up into his own, one head blinded, one head whole. Why did he feel as though he saw judgment there in that single avian eye? Why was
Accurate.
that judgment so cold, so painful? Did he worship the Emperor? Or did he only worship death in the Emperor's name?
This is
Yep.
wrong.
Emiliana whispered, barely audible now, as Shadrick smiled and turned to face Captain Stern one last time. Was this wrong? Why was he asking that question? It was not his job to judge that. He was but a tool, a soldier. He had his orders, and good soldiers followed orders. That was what was demanded of him. He was safe. Even if the orders were wrong, they were not his responsibility. They were not his sin. He was just doing his duty. The Emperor had to know that.
But-
Emiliana had to know that. Captain Stern.
Oh, two things. One, yeah, rip-off production mentioned I was thinking of Quake shells, not volcano cannon shells. Yeah, that one's on me. But also, the fact that he immediately went to, they had to know that, the Emperor had to know that, and immediately after the Emperor came Emiliana. God damn, man. Ooh.
The Commissar began to say as he
Pretty high
angled his
praise.
new stolen weapon down to aim into the Cadian's head. The men and women here will all die as martyrs to the Imperium's cause. They will enter the Emperor's final service with the highest honor a guardsman can achieve, having given their lives for victory. But not you. You who led them against me, who broke the chain of command to obey a false saint. Shadrick proclaimed, flicking a switch on the gun he held, plasma beginning to heat within the coils.
Please let it just blow up in his hand.
These words also struck at 1313 himself, still standing behind Stern, taking a few steps back as Shadrick prepared to execute the man personally with a very powerful weapon. What the Commissar had just said was implicitly wrong. Lazarus was no false saint. In fact, it was because he was a saint that they could not obey him above Shadrick. Again, he reminded himself that it was not his place to judge his superiors, to decide when they were right and wrong. You will not be martyred. You will be executed here and now by me. In the Emperor's name, I condemn you to his darkest judgment. May he purge your soul of the fear that led you to this weakness.
I absolutely love when writers do this, and fans doing a good example of it. When you have someone who you know doesn't believe a word of what they just said, spout off this absolute drivel about how, oh, I condemn you in the Emperor's name. That's my Shadrick impression. As you can tell, I don't do impressions well. Because yeah, we know he's the dumbass who would go chaos if they gave him a good offer. Because he's such a fucking idiot. But he's talking about faith and judgment to people who actually have that. And it's so on the nose and it's so blatant and it's such a good job because it's highlighting the hypocrisy perfectly. Even more, well, actually just as much as that earlier moment that 1313 was catching on about calling Lazarus a false saint. It's well done writing because it hammers home the point of this guy is two-faced. So the next words are just blatantly, obviously two-faced, where if we didn't have that context that he was lying so much, and, you know, if we had just met the character now, we might think he's telling the truth and he believes this. But because of the context of everything prior to this, and because of the statement blatantly being called out as a lie by 1313's own internal monologue, we know just how smarmy he is right now. And it's just well done because it gives you context and it tells you how you're supposed to think about a phrase without needing to write it down, because due to implications of the writing, you understand the context. The reason I'm highlighting this is because when you don't do that, you get things that are like, he said it. He lied because he does not actually believe this. And then he said this, but this time he was telling the truth because he believed it. But then he did this, and this time he wasn't sure if he believed it or not, but he did it anyways. And then he found out he didn't believe it later, but he didn't like it, so he believed it. And this, You see? Over-explaining doesn't always help unless you're trying to show someone in a mental loop or to slow something down, because the more you do that, the more you get drawn into it, where implication showing one thing to imply the other is a really good way to do it. But it's not easy to do because it requires a bit of mental gymnastics that a lot of people don't think about. It's not easy. In fact, one of the easier way to do it is rereading it and doing those edits to have those implications, because you don't need to do it the first draft. Also, because I'm not sure how a fan's writing process works, but an easy way to do it would be the first draft is the shit. Admittedly, I would actually always want to do the first draft as shit. In fact, if you're trying to make your first draft spell correctly, you're doing it wrong. Make sure to intentionally misspell shit. Go in there, make it so horrible that any teacher who ever saw it would have a panic attack. And then just edit it later. Don't worry about grammar. Just go in, fix it, add the implication, fix the basic story beats first, then the implication second, and then the grammar third. I mean, there's going to be a lot more steps in between, but that's basically how the writing process works. Generally. Some people are freaks and they just do it right the first time, but those are usually Stephen King, because he's an absolute monster when it comes to writing and his style is insane. Also, he writes all his novels, then waits a year or more to edit them. I'm not sure if his style has changed, but that's a thing, so yeah.
Pronounced Commissar Captain Shadrick, the archaic weapon in his hand beginning to keen deeply and glow.
And blow up.
Emiliana drew in a hissing breath, and though he could not see it, 13 knew her hands were now trembling. So was he, almost trembling.
This is wrong, and you know it!
The corporal insisted, speaking more loudly now, directing the words of the commissar instead of the Krieger.
Oh, he doesn't care.
Shadrick's eyes slid over to her, and he scoffed openly. Already the sins of your captain infect the rest of you Cadians. It is better that you should die now than be seen for the laxity you now display in your duty. I always knew it lurked beneath the surface. The Cadian Guard has long been overlauded, but if you were the match of Krieg or Carcosa when it came to virtue, then perhaps Cadia would not have fallen.
Oh! Oh, damn. Okay. That isn't just fighting words. That is, I'm going to risk stabbing you with a gun to my head words.
The idea that the Imperium would see the loss of a world and the continuing survival of its regiment as some kind of strength or victory has always been laughable. If you had more steadfast resolve, more faith, more willingness to do what is right, then perhaps Cadia would not have ever fallen at all.
No, they have a very good point here. They should shoot him. Just immediately shoot him and take the losses. Shooting him is a good option. I think they should shoot him right now.
And if it did, then justice demands you fall with it. The cruel Commissar condemned,
Which he's also bullshitting about because he's talking about die with your planet. And also he's about to condemn a planet and immediately run away while everyone else dies.
smirking widely a moment later when the signal light atop the beacon he still wore over his shoulder began to glow and blink.
And Fenn is even saying it in context, because he's like, you should die with your planet rather than flee and live, while he immediately highlights the blinking beacon showing that he is going to live and run away, doing the exact thing that he is now berating them about, because it's all just words to him. Ugh. Again, my internal monologues or talk about his context to show meaning. Here is an example!
And it was as this occurred that 1313 realized that Emiliana was right and Shadrick was wrong.
Yep.
That it did not require a deep judgment to realize it. This was no opinion. This was no chanced or measured thought. It was simply the truth. Commissar Captain Shadrick had lost his mind and was issuing orders and making proclamations which were fundamentally wrong. The sons of Krieg had broken their own world and killed nearly everything on its surface because Krieg had sinned. Cadia had shattered, and yet its soldiers fought on, unbroken despite the breaking of their own homeworld. Weakness and vileness was the legacy of Krieg, and the very blood from which they all sprang, himself included. Heroism and sacrifice was the truth of Cadia. A truth that had carried them all the way to a new galaxy. A truth he had seen with his own eyes. How could 1313 ever have thought differently? Good soldiers followed orders, but when various contradicting orders were given, and the cold pages of the Munitorum manual offered a path that led into what was explicitly wrong, explicitly untrue, then what was a good soldier to do?
And unfortunately, in the Imperium, the answer is follow the bad orders and die horribly, wasting resources. It's one of the internal problems of the Imperium that is absolutely frustrating and very much intentionally kept by Games Workshop to show that they're not actually well run. If they made it too good, admittedly, the scene would probably become closer to what Infinity has, but that's not important right now. Also, oh, hey, Owen Wilson, gifted 5 memberships. Thank you very much, man. Nice. Wait, Alfarius was gifted a membership. Oh my. That's moderately terrifying. And Hobbit immediately goes, Hail Hydra. I think that's a different one, but okay, sure, why not? And Ripoff Productions said, if only Cadia was as loyal as Krieg, but Krieg sinned. I love how he screwed himself there. Yeah, because Shadrick doesn't actually value loyalty. He values blind obedience because he isn't actually loyal to anyone. And again, the guy would fit in perfectly with Chaos. Like, unironically, he actually would do really well there. And by really well, I mean die horribly as a cultist, because there's no way anyone would be dumb enough to listen to him.
Did he fight to die, or did he fight to win? The decision hovered over him like a lethal blade, pending his choosing of a path. The path of righteous duty, or the path of potential victory.
Also, holy shit, Owen Wilson, you just gifted 10 more memberships? God damn! As long as everyone doesn't change their name to Alfarius, that would be a little freaky. Damn, thank you very much, man. Although if it is too much, please feel free to refund that. I don't mind.
Gritting his teeth, emotion breaking the surface of his placid features, he made his decision. You are mistaken, growled the young man as he lifted his aim up from Captain Stern's head.
Shadrick was still smirking as the gun's barrel was raised and pointed into his own center of mass.
If it's close enough, there's no shield.
The Commissar's eyes began to change as the words were slowly absorbed.
Maybe if we're very lucky, they'll change into a hole. Maybe a big one right through.
But the change scarcely had time to reach the rest of his face before the young soldier continued. Commissar Captain Shadrick, your judgment is impaired. In accordance with Minotaur Regulation 3123, I am divesting you of command until such a time that your mentality can be assessed by someone of higher rank.
I have no idea if fan made this up or not. I'm kind of assuming it is, because if impaired mentality was actually a thing in 40K, there would be a lot of people who would not be there. Oh, God. And Owen, you're good? All right. As long as you're okay with it, then. Thank you very much, man.
The Krieger announced, making the man's face redden. I am here on behalf of the Inquisition.
Are you?
That regulation does not. Shadrick began to contest. Present evidence for the claim.
Yes!
1313 ordered.
He can't, because he was left out to dry.
Salivating with rage. What are you saying? You do not even have cause to believe that I am unsound. I am under no obligation to... He began to yell, but once more, the Krieger cut him off. Krieg sinned. The 15-year-old soldier stated, his face melting back into placidity, all pieces now in their place. Shadrick growled and began to lift his own weapon away from Captain Stern. You insubordinate cur! The Commissar howled. Cadia stands. 1313 finished, his voice flat, matter-of-fact, his eyes level, steady as steel. And his heart did not ache as he pulled the trigger and fired the searing stream of light from his silver hot-shot las pistol. The discharge was lightning fast, finding the center of Commissar Shadrick's chest before he could even blink.
Yeah?
There was a brief moment as the air and armor there were atomized by the close-range impact of the hyper-agitated light photons. And then, the void created by the blast was rapidly filled, collapsing the air and throwing the discharged commander off his feet, back slamming into the floor with a loud crack.
God damn, he didn't have a shield up, or he was so close it didn't matter. Oh, that is satisfying. I'm going to listen to it again. Also, because of how epic that is, I do need to change the title of the stream. It's going to be Krieg Sind Cadia stands, I mean. I also have no idea how to spell Krieg now that I think about it. That's actually embarrassing. Also, I just misspelled 40K as 40L. That's also embarrassing. I need to stop embarrassing myself. No, well, you look at that. I said it right. Dude, I want to hear that again.
Room collapsing. The void created by the blast was...
Also, holy shit, did you... Owen Wilson, you just gifted another 10 memberships? Dude, thank you. But also, consider stopping. I know you said you're okay with it, but that's a lot, man. Don't go too far. I don't mind, but thank you. But don't push yourself if it's a problem. Dude.
Rapidly filled, collapsing the air and throwing the discharged commander off his feet, back slamming into the floor.
No resurrection for you.
Crack. The room was frozen then, every mind shocked by the sudden turn.
Will the Cadians
1313 did not pause as he raised his pistol, bending his elbow to look around it and see the damage he had done. Smoke and soot rising from the now unmoving chest of Commissar Shadrick.
Okay, he's dead. Now the important part. Do the Kriegers listen to 1313? He cited regulations giving them an out. But will they take it? I mean, Shadrick's men are probably in the position of, oh shit, we don't kill them all, we all die. Which is probably accurate. Because they were following a guy. And Hobbit also gifted 10 memberships in the chat. What the fuck, guys? I mean, thank you, but also, god damn. I think there's a bidding war. I honestly wish I knew how to make the macros to show who had the most donations right now or the most memberships gifted, because at this point, I kind of want to see what could, and Hobbit gifted an additional 1 membership. Oh my god. Dear God, guys, thank you very much, but also, if it's too much, seriously, you don't have to.
Satisfied with the shot, the Krieger nodded once, very slightly, and then looked to the side, half expecting to be executed himself, but having in him no fear of death at all. He saw that nearly every soldier in the room, Krieger and Cadian alike, was staring directly at him. The exposed faces of the Cadians slack-jawed beneath their helmets.
Because he would have just done the one thing that no one from Cadia and no one from Krieg could imagine. A Krieger doing more than just blindly following orders. Cadia would never imagine that, because Krieg is known for not doing that. And for the Kriegers, that's probably even more, because when one of them tried to make an opinion and known, which admittedly on its own right was kind of shocking to me, they immediately stopped listening when they were told not to. When the shock wears off, though, who starts shooting first? I'm still assuming it's probably going to be the retinue that came with the Commissar, though. Also, another member. Dear God, Hobbit gifted another membership. Tempest gifted 5 memberships? Okay, we have a bidding war today. God damn. No, dude, Burb, you have to cancel your membership. I don't mind, dude. I set the things lower to like the $2 level so that's not a problem for people. And if that's too much, I don't mind canceling it. Do what's good for you. Like, if you just want to watch for free, that's fine. That's why whenever I do the live streams with all the recordings, I put it up there. I don't want to like time gate people permanently. I don't want you to get into any issue where money's a problem. So if it's ever an issue, you don't have to explain anything to me. You don't owe me that. I just try and give people who do subscribe a little more early access because, well, it seems nice for the people to actually get something useful out of it. But if it's a problem, I don't mind. And Owen said, don't try it, Hobbit. I have the high funds. Oh my God. The Burb, seriously. I don't mind, man. Just being here is more than enough. Thank you.
His eye found Emiliana's face first, her las rifle lowering, a relieved smile now slowly growing over her face as her eyes began to glisten. And then she stiffened and raised her rifle, firing her own concentrated beam and immediately ending the life of the would-be pawn of Shadrick's insane design. 1313 flinched, the searing heat moving right past his head as the photonic ray of energy carved into the skull of Shadrick's tech adept, who...
The guy who was prepping the bomb. Are there any other tech adepts here who would be able to disarm that? Because, it's already armed. Krieg may or may not decide to shoot all the Cadians, but that won't matter if the bomb's already set. Ooh. Yeah, that's probably not good.
While momentarily stunned like the rest, had suddenly moved with desperate speed to activate the release sequence for the bomb. It was an act he left incomplete as his head came apart in a blaze of light, body thumping over his tech interrogators, blackened blood soon pooling over the instrumentation.
Not done.
Isn't dropping. Was not the end of it, as Shadrick's remaining guards spun on their heels to return the lethality sent into their master.
Because they are all brainwashed soldiers at this point, because again, Krieg gave Shadrick what he wanted, but what he also had from everyone else was even more blind loyalty. They're probably looking to die now because their master's dead.
Only to find the fleeting sight of a knife entering an eye on each soldier, Vetnex having acted in the same moment as Emiliana, slinging 2 of his 4 weapons into their faces. And
wait, he did... Shooting someone fast is impressive. Taking out soldiers with 2 thrown knives at the same time? Okay, we have Deadshot as apparently a character in this. Why not?
And ending their lives nearly as quickly as Emiliana had ended the life of the tech adept. The tension was high in the aftermath, the Kriegers in the room holding their weapons steady, ready to engage. But there was no one among the Death Corps present who ranked higher than a sergeant, leaving no single figure to determine the right and wrong of what had just happened. All of it having had the creed of the Astra Militara invoked, the final judgment coming from one of their own. Instead, now they all faced the same crux that 1313 had already crossed. The decision left entirely in their hands, and after a moment...
This is going to be a problem because I don't see them all making the same decision here, and that might be more damaging than anything.
Those hands lifted the barrels of their weapons skyward. The commanding officer was dead. The new commanding officer was, by protocol, Sergeant Vetnex.
And they actually make the right choice. Oh, I actually was a little concerned he would have them break down and shoot everyone here. Still worried about the bomb being primed. Fan mentioned it wasn't completed, but that's maybe a couple pushes away by accident from it happening. All they need is someone not being completely dead.
Since Captain Stern was technically still designated as unfit for duty, the Cadians were slower to imitate them. Lasguns still aimed in towards the silent soldiers of the Death Corps, but that did not last long either. "Lower your weapons," Vet growled at them. "All of you, no more Imperials are killing each other today." Without hesitation, the Cadians complied, most still in shock even as they lowered their barrels to the ground. A few seconds later, as it sank in that no one was going to be killing them all or forcing a fight between them, a beleaguered cheer rose up from the men in green, first staggered and then unanimous.
This actually went a lot better than I expected. I legitimately thought the bomb would get dropped on this one, that's some kind of imminent time limit that Fan would force everyone to work under, partially because he might just want to end this entire Axum arc and be done with it. So it'd probably only take another 20 hours of writing to get to that immediate end. Yeah, I heard early on that he thought Axum would be a short section. There would be like a couple chapters. Yeah, I don't think that worked out. Also, Owen Wilson, you asked, in one word, how would I describe Undertale? Ooh, in one word, that would be hard. Probably basis, just because while Undertale is good on its own right, the entire universe of people creating fiction around it is basically working in the same process that the Cthulhu mythos has, and I can see it outliving its creator. And I don't mean that in any negative way. I mean in a legitimate sense. It'll probably be people making Undertale content in the same way there's people making Cthulhu content well after I was going to say H.P. Geiger, but I know that's not correct. It's H.P. Lovecraft died. I can see that lasting a lot of people because it just keeps growing and building on itself.
1313 stared blankly as he was suddenly yanked forward into an embrace, Emiliana holding him tightly as she joined the chorus. Relief and elation mixing like a heady drug in every single soldier that still valued their life. The Corps.
Just to clarify, does that mean the Kriegers are doing something? Because they don't value their lives.
Men had no reaction, standing right where they were and awaiting further orders, save for 1313, who felt an odd heat branding over his face as the Cadian woman pulled him in close. Captain Stern lifted himself back up to his feet, sweating profusely and grinning like an idiot, just as subject to the sudden relief as any of his men.
Not being shot does that.
He came over to 1313 and slapped his helmet as Emiliana blushed and gave him back a little space, though the slap was playful as opposed to chastising. "Emperor bless you, you crazy death-worshipping plank.
Yeah.
I'll make sure you get promoted for this, soon as I get my captaincy back." The dark-skinned, amethyst-eyed Imperial announced, a renewed cheer following the proclamation. The celebration, however, was cruelly short-lived.
Why?
Shadrick gasped, eyes suddenly fluttering into wakefulness.
How did he survive that? I'm assuming he had some kind of specialty role here. Why not? Or he bought prosthetics.
Something only 1313 saw as it happened. His face tensed, and he tried to shove past the grateful captain, arm caught between them. Yet before he could fire off a second killing shot from his last pistol, the Commissar lifted his stolen plasma gun and aimed it up, shaky grip centering on the Kriegsman who had shot him and the captain standing in front of him. "For the Imperium!" The wounded Shadrick growled.
I'm actually surprised that's his choice of words. Also, The Tempest. Just a small request, can I direct to all Guardsman Party? It's D&D 40K campaign, told in story format. Just check it out whenever you like, and support from India. Honestly, people have been asking me to do that one for a while. I only haven't because I've already been listening to a story format 40K story with Star Wars Warhammer 40K. I might check it out after I finish this, though, because I mean, a lot of people have recommended it. It's probably really good. I just haven't got around to it. It's definitely something I need to look at. Either way, though, it's something I probably will eventually check out, but not until this story's done. Which might actually be closer than I think, because I think I'm catching up to fan, and I don't like that, because I don't want to catch up to fan, because this is freaking awesome!
Blood flecking his white teeth before he jerked his arm higher still and fired. The shot sailed over their heads, the cheers dying on the lips of any voicing them as countless eyes followed the arcing ball of plasma. It slammed into the massive chain which held the bomb aloft. And in a flash of blue radiance, it ate through the metal and snapped the binding cleanly. The virus bomb, already open.
And unfortunately, Shadrick had to be a competent shot, damn it. Even with a gun he's not experienced with.
And primed for detonation, hung for only a brief moment before plummeting into the pit, hurtling towards the heart of the world. It would soon kill. You insane frack!
Shoot him.
Vet roared, speaking as he raised his arm, knife brandished in his hand. He threw it end over end at the Commissar on the ground, just as 1313 freed his arm and fired, both intent on ending Shadrick before the rest of them died from the...
Shadrick's going to survive by pressing the teleport button, isn't he? God damn it. Also, holy shit, how many knives does Vec have?
Bomb. But in
No, seriously, is Vec a Cadian, or is he just a random guy from... Wow, I forgot the Death World's name. I'm actually kicking myself on this one. Death World. Not Cadia, one of the standard companies you can get in 40K. Has a thing with a bunch of people who have basically the Rambo aesthetic. I'm kicking myself on this one so hard right now. Catachan, that's the one. Thanks, Lop. Seriously, he's a freaking Catachan at this point.
a second flash of light, the Commissar was suddenly gone.
Yeah!
Vetnex's knife burrowing 2 inches into the stone ground where Shadrick's head had been.
He throws knives that can cut stone. Imperium stone, which is holding up somewhat to enemy orbital bombardment. Okay, sure.
A searing hot beam of light blowing a head-sized hole in the ground beside it. And all the while, everyone watched on. 1313 did not fear death, but somehow, this felt worse than death. This felt like failure, and his strength, long upheld, began to flee him rapidly. He sagged on his feet, supported by Emiliana as a wave of raw humanity passed through him. His raised arm dropped to his side, his heart racing, mind slowing, but thoughts entirely
There's
blank.
the bomb.
Nothing could be done. No line could be charged. No tactic could be used.
The only upside is, depending on how fast it goes, maybe it'll hit a certain Commissar, a certain Inquisitor, who it probably wouldn't matter, because when you're Alpha Plus, you could probably just say, this doesn't apply to me, and it actually would stick.
He had failed. He had tried to do the right thing, and he had failed.
It does matter, though.
It's all right, 13. The corporal said to him, her voice trembling as she felt him slackening more and more. No, it isn't. I didn't stop him. Shadrick won. The Imperium lost, he said, words hollow, his lowered remaining arm shaking, his gun dropping from his hand. But the Cadian woman did not drop him, shoving him back onto his feet and grasping either side of his head.
Admittedly, the bomb was only primed. Is it delicate enough to go off with hitting the ground? I don't know. Fan could probably play that however he wants.
You did what you thought was right, she said to him, eyes boring into his remaining one, an eye that now stung, now rimmed with rare tears. You will still die, he said in a whisper. She nodded her head, not denying it. We all will. That isn't what matters now, was her answer to him. 1313 closing his eye as she wiped it for him. How can you say that? Even now, how are you like this? he asked her, wondering how she still had this strength, even in the face of a death she had wanted to avoid.
If the words out of her mouth aren't Cadia stands, I'm going to be laughing my ass off.
Even when he felt his faltering in the face of his failure. She firmed her expression, hands sliding down to his shoulders and helping him steady himself.
Because I have always known what matters, and it still matters,
the corporal asserted.
Not that we live, not even that we win.
She continued, pulling her hands back and allowing him to support himself fully, giving him a grim, humorless, but genuine smile.
Only that we try, onto our dying breath. All that is asked of us is that we never break and never stop aiming for the victory, for what is right, that we hold fast, even in the face of despair, even in the face of death. All that the Emperor demands of us is that we die standing.
And with the words, 1313 suddenly understood. His eye widened, and he nodded, his face, numbness receding. This was the strength of Cadia, the reason they had never broken when Krieg had been broken so long ago. This was the strength of Yerton, the true power of humanity. How had he not noticed it before? How had he confused death-seeking for this? The difference between his home and her own now became apparent in his mind. The Death Corps embraced death, accepted it, surrendered to it. The Cadia...
I mean, give them a little credit. They're also heavily funneled into that. Doesn't make sense in the lore to, not the, specifically fans lore right now to point it out, but yeah, everything he's realizing is very true. But also, the Munitorum is completely okay with nurturing that delusion because it gives them more soldiers.
Canadian Guard stood firm against it, even if it meant death. They never surrendered to it. To embrace the end, and to defy the end. Neither staved off death, but both defined its context. He steadied his face and nodded firmly back to her. Die standing. Yes, I can still do that. He stated, his voice not trembling, not entirely placid, but composed of a newer strength, and Emiliana's smile grew softer. There was no joy in it, but there was pride, and he shared it with her, if only for a brief moment. What a strange feeling. Pride. Not shame, not fear, not faith, but pride. So this was what it felt like to be free. He was oddly glad, and thanked the Emperor that he could experience it at least once, even if only now, at the very end.
Well said,
spoke a voice from the
What?
entrance into the room.
well said indeed.
I know Fan's voice of when he does that specific one, but how would getting the Canoness help with this point? God magic.
Faces turned to see the willowy shape of Ishara Ordain, her body wrapped in bandages, her hand gripping a small flamer. She stalked and strode into the room like a being submerged in water, just heavy enough to propel herself forward. "Holiness," said Captain Stern, his face stricken. "We failed to stop him. The bomb," he began to explain.
All is as it should be. The Emperor's design cannot be subdued by something as meager as a virus bomb.
Yeah. The Horus Heresy would disagree with you on that one.
Spoke the Canoness Superior.
Even as we speak, the entirety of the Imperium's forces on this planet are sheltering here, in the house of their Emperor. They shall not be betrayed. This I swear.
The old,
she make a bastion of
bandaged
it?
woman announced, striding forward.
Go. Survive. Carry the lessons learned here to the rest of the Imperium.
I mean, it is possible to survive virus bombing if you can take enough shelter. It's unlikely, but it can happen. Rylanor. And yeah, that's the one I'm thinking about technically counts as enough shelter. A dreadnought buried underground through most of the planet. Survive might not be the right choice. Ooh, Josh Tompkins. A member for 6 months. Wow, and have some faith, Airier. Honestly, considering I play Sisters, well, play is an overstatement considering I haven't actually touched 10th edition more than once. Yeah, whatever. It's all the same. Thank you very much, man.
Ensure that St. Lazarus does not fail, she continued to say as she walked up to and past the captain.
But Canoness, the weapon was primed,
Shouted Sergeant Vetnex.
It will detonate the moment it strikes the ground. There is nothing that can be done.
He insisted. She scoffed at that and continued moving forward,
Magic.
acting as though the very voiced notion was ridiculous. Who decided that? She asked him without looking back in Vet's direction.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That is one of my favorite lines. Whenever someone proclaims something, you just say, who decided that? It's such a good boast. I want to hear it again.
Decided that.
Do it again.
Voiced notion was ridiculous. Who decided that? She asked him without looking back in Vet's direction. A man with a weapon? An inquisitor hiding in the shadows? A prideful sinner with a single breath left in his body? Is that all it takes to defeat your faith? Deny me not. I speak for the Emperor. I am his will made manifest, and I am not so easily defeated. Go, I said.
I mean, you already told the Grim
Think
Reaper
no
to fuck
more
off.
of this. Leave it in the Master's hands. He shall not lead you astray. Ishara countered, moving closer and closer to the raised rim of the altar. The venerable Canoness paused then, standing beside 1313 and Emiliana. The two of you, she announced, turning to face them.
What,
her
she's gonna
eyes
marry them on the
bright
spot?
and golden, like the rays of the sun. Aid me. These old bones have one last journey to make.
I think you had your one last journey way a bit ago when you got hit by a spaceship. You're well past that one journey, lady. The best part is she's completely bullshitting them about that. Even if it actually turns out to be the last one, she's just saying it to make them help her because she's pulling them aside, which also elevates them because they're directly in the chain of command of the ecclesiarchy now by listening to her.
Ishara ordered. At her command, the two soldiers hesitantly nodded and went to either side of her, taking her hands and helping her as the ancient canoness endeavored to climb the tall base of the altar, stepping onto the heads of stone daemons and climbing upon the angled blades of the angels who struck down at them. As she did, she leaned heavily against 1313 in spite of his one arm, and her lips came close to his ear.
Keep that pride, man of Krieg. Stand taller than the
Who's saying this?
Spite of, as she did, she leaned heavily against 1313 in spite of his one arm, and her lips came close to his ear.
Keep that pride.
She's speaking in the Emperor's voice. I was wondering what that was.
That man of Krieg. Stand taller than the sin that plagues you.
She said in a voice that was not her own, and when she pushed away from him and stood atop the rim of the pit, the Krieger was left breathless.
Yep. And this is definitely fans' interpretation of the God Emperor as actually being aware of his saints. That's a little debatable in canon. And even the earlier usage of power directly to counter one of the, well, I was going to say Psyker, but to counter one of the Jedi, that could just be invoking him rather than him acting. This is him acting directly. Honestly, I was kind of under the impression that she was invoking the Emperor more than actually tapping into him. I realized it just said she tapped that. I think Fan's a bad influence.
His final eye wide as a plate as he tried to absorb her words. I go now to do the Emperor's will. Ensure that you do the same. The venerable priestess of war proclaimed to the assembled soldiers. And then, without further preamble, she leaned forward and fell into the yawning pit, descending like a thin lance wrapped in flagging bandages, aimed right for the soon-to-be rotting heart of Axum.
Did she just swan dive into the planet? God damn, if she actually comes back alive from this, I'm going to admittedly laugh my ass off still. Jedi Master Coleman Kaji? Kaj? I don't know how to pronounce KC. Granted, I don't know how to say AJ or AJ either, so. Also, according to Fan right now, the exact phrase he used was "no, Airier, no," followed by Hobbit going bonk, Matthew going bonk, Bird going, "Why did you have to plant that in my mind?" V. Sora going bonk, and then Drake is like, "I am the bad influence." I have no idea what anyone's talking about. Oh, that is a face.
Coleman ordered his command gunship to circle the entire perimeter of the Basilica several times, alien eye stalks taking in all he saw. The Imperial forces
stalks?
were abandoning their ruined walls and fortifications, retreating in layered withdrawals back into the massive central construct that was the Gothic cathedral at the center. His hundreds of gunships circled with him, most heavy with troops and vehicles, all unloading with strafing distance fire from their various laser cannons and missile launchers, encouraging the retreat and blasting the lines of imps as they fell back. Purple enemy gunships had been present, descending and disgorging additional forces from the enormous duo of Imperial starships which hung perilously above the battlefield, directly skyward of the Imperial Church Fortress. The alien Jedi Master clicked his tongue within his upside-down, lipless mouth, one of his eye stalks staring up at the gargantuan dreadnoughts as they exchanged fire with several encroaching Venators from all sides. Before they had been locked
Oh no, he's talking about the other gunships, not his gunship.
up with the Republic Space Forces,
Thought for a second he was
K-Cash had
doing it.
noticed that they had fired various rounds of some kind of low-impact weapon into the spires around their combat zone.
He hasn't realized their drop pods because that's not something 40K has. No, it's not something that Star Wars has. They have people jumping from orbit, but they don't have people jumping in drop pods.
All tall, but distant from the actual battlefield. The Jedi Council member was no stranger to odd deployment tactics and suspected that these were not weapons at all, but
So
some
he does
method
realize
of
it.
quick disembarkment.
Maybe, okay.
And the scattered pattern of it all suggested some kind of encirclement. This was
figured it out.
emphasized as the likely case within his alien mind as dropships followed the trails of those first salvos, even as the Venator reinforcements began to converge and fire into the imposing Imperial ships. Formidable though the invaders were, they were not invulnerable, and holding their positions in the air would mean they could only linger for a limited time before they were brought burning to the steel earth of Axum's already scarred surface. Whatever these new foes were about to try, it was clear to the Jedi Master that it was going to be a rapid endeavor, and so he was silently compelled to act rapidly as well.
What would a Jedi making a snap judgment look like who's not Mace Windu? I actually don't know.
Rapidly, but not hastily. 500 Jedi Knights and over 10,000 clone troopers were at his command.
How many Jedi did they have on this planet? Because they've lost hundreds in various traps that failed and due to a certain Alpha plus Psyker, my ass.
A force which could conquer a planet, brought together to force the Imperials out of their holes. K-Cash was determined not to
That's how you say it? K-Cash? Why does it sound like he's going cash on this one? I don't know.
squander them.
Commander Neo.
He said as he eyed both Earth
Fan actually put subtitles in because of how hard the translation of the voice would be. Admittedly, it actually is pretty understandable, and it's not nearly as bad as some of the more robotic ones he's done before.
and air simultaneously.
How many dropships have landed in the immediate battlefield we are about to engage in?
Actually, I really don't think he needs the captions here at all. I don't mind them, but he really doesn't need them. It's actually very understandable.
The commander strode to the side of his
cool
Jedi
effect, I
general
like it.
and saluted.
No less than 3, maybe 5 total if they got some down before we were able to observe them. Many more to the surrounding spires, though.
Did Fan change up how he does clone voices? That sounds a little more punchy. Not bad.
The clone reported. The Jedi Master nodded slowly, eyes blinking with sideways lids.
Contact Master Opor and Cesis. Request that he take another large contingent of Jedi and clones and secure those positions. I do not want to suddenly find our forces surrounded. I would like the spires cleared and secured, and if not that, contained so that none of the forces on the spires are free to advance.
The council member ordered.
Yes, sir.
Was the clone's swift reply before he turned away and began to relay the request.
So according to people in the chat, the voices sound slightly off because it's not just impressions done by Fan, but an actual voice changer done by an AI. Although functionally that isn't actually an AI, it's just a programming that runs an algorithm to alter the variances and has actually existed for quite a while, but everything's just branded AI now. It's kind of like large language models are not actually AI, they're just prediction algorithms. So, sorry, this is my own personal gripe with people calling things AI when they are in no way, shape, or form AI. It actually kind of bugs me a bit.
While he did, Coleman came.
Also, I just need to clarify, I don't mean being called AI by Fan. I mean companies branding things AI when it's just a marketing gimmick.
Akash turned his mind back towards the field of battle he would soon be invading. The civilian rebel casualties from this battle had been appalling. The charge towards the Basilica's defenses having left long, solid lines of corpses and wounded that he could easily see even now. Why had Master Mace Windu encouraged this kind of assault when it so obviously resulted in...
Ooh, now that's an actual bit of information I'm very curious about. So it's not even that they're aware of how bad it is, which on the face you can see, but that someone is questioning Windu on the face of it, even if it's just in their head right now. Wonder if this guy gets red-shirted, because if anything stops Windu right now, whatever Fan's planning might not happen.
this atrocious rate of attrition. Admittedly, the late arrival of the Republic forces during the charge and his quick decision to withdraw from the perimeter of the combat zone had spared the Jedi many losses.
And he's attributing Obi-Wan's withdrawal order, which turned out to be correct, to Mace Windu. So even though he's questioning it, he still thinks that Windu has some tactical capacity, which he doesn't, and we know, but he doesn't. Oh. Because Windu's completely lost it. But because, before being knocked out, Obi-Wan did the right thing, he accidentally lent credibility to Windu that he doesn't have anymore. I'm sure that'll never come back to be a problem.
Both in the lives of their own order and that of the clones, but it also called into question the point of the attack at all. It was a question he and the others would be sure to ask later. But the past was immutable, and the future needed to be shaped in the present. He doubted that the scant reinforcements which had landed would make a large difference, and their gunships, exposed on the ground, had remained only long enough to disgorge their warrior payloads, before rocketing away back up to their behemoth motherships, spitting light fire back at the Republic gunships as they retreated, neither side having had the chance to fully engage the other before they were gone. Coleman had barely managed to catch a glimpse of the last few reinforcements they dispatched, the large purple and white armored warriors falling back into the cathedral almost as soon as they had disembarked. Space Marines, Coleman suspected. The most lethal possible warriors that the Imperial invaders could field.
Actually, I would say that the most lethal possible warriors isn't entirely accurate, only because, unfortunately, Alpha Plus Psyker is taking your warriors and says, fuck you, I have space magic. But he also doesn't know that, and frankly, the Imperium probably doesn't know that either right now, because if they did, Commissar or not, I don't think he'd be in very good standing. And by standing, I mean not fed to the Emperor and or slagged. Yeah. Actually, now that I think about it, as far as Alpha Plus Psychers go, he's remarkably less crazy than most of them. I know what I said. Yeah. Also, I don't think there's any... There were a few custodies? I don't remember if the custodies... No, there were a few custodies. Yeah, I forgot about them because it's been so long. And they were only briefly on stage.
According to young Anakin Skywalker, who had nearly faced grievous injury or death at the hands of one of their own. But a literal handful of these kinds of soldiers could not stand against more than 50 times their number in Jedi.
That depends. What are they dropping with? If they have heavy enough weapons, I think they're fine. And it's not like this is a unit who we know from the outside is a bunch of guys who are more along the lines of the Iron Fists. Sorry, Iron Hands. You know, more inclined to the throw the giant gun at it option.
To say nothing of the clones who stood alongside them. Even so, K-Kaj was not quick to dismiss the threat, though in his mind, the encirclement and possible traps left behind by the Imperial retreat was where the greatest danger lay.
It is done, sir.
Reported Commander Neo.
Good. Have our armored forces begin landing outside of a perimeter. Have recon teams deploy along the outer and middle sections of the Imperial defensive front. Once free, they should quickly sweep the ruins and abandon the hardpoints for traps and unusual technology. Have them report anything they find. Detonate anything suspicious with demolition teams. As they clear the area, have the Warhammer and speeder tanks advance with infantry to board.
The Master commanded, pointing...
Huh. Sorry, this is just something I don't really see often in most media. People actually giving good directions. I mean, normally it's you see the outcome where it bullshits, or you see people who don't know what's going on acting out the motions, kind of like what happened earlier on with Lazarus before he became the saint. You don't actually have people giving the directions because that's not usually what people focus on. So it's kind of unique to see that. I also know why they don't usually do it, because if you do it too much, it becomes a very stale, very dry delivery. But as a way to show someone thinking through the options, and because even though Fan pulled up a character who looks monstrous, we're giving a lot of thought process. So we have the inner workings. We see him doubting but thinking through the logic of something. So giving logical orders does kind of enhance that. Which is making me wonder what exactly is about to happen, because Fan is describing an incredibly competent commander who a lot of the Jedi were explicitly chosen not for, which is intentionally what Palpatine was doing. Some of them became competent, and by this point I think most of the ones who weren't are probably dead, but this guy is on the ball. What is Fan doing by showing us a competent commander? Because he's showing us a competent commander who's going to be first engaging the Space Marines and actually engaging them. Prior to this, it's always been small skirmishes or a lot of fighting with Space Marines off screen, or Dooku slaughtering a bunch, but then that's because Fan was building up just how powerful he's making Dooku. So it's not going to be the standard fight we've seen so far, but it's finally actual Space Marines, as opposed to its Ogrins being confused for Space Marines.
Down at the ground at landing zones as he did.
Once we have cleared and secured the outer and center portions of the approach, I want our forces to completely encircle the area around the cathedral.
Because he's fighting like it's normal troops.
Please take up their furthest positions to supply the front with focused fire.
He's fighting them like enemy soldiers. The correct way to look at it would be if every single one was a super Mandalorian, essentially. Or a Jedi Mandalorian, which technically in lore does exist. Because the founder of the Darksaber and all that bullshit was actually a Jedi. Yeah, that's a thing. I thought I was misreading that, but no, apparently it's a thing. Also, Josh Tompkins won. Thank you, too. Kasaj and Oppo Rassis are two of the few Jedi who actually qualified to lead an army. I don't actually know much about Rassis. Actually, I never even heard about this guy until then. Most of the old lore I have is just the movies, which didn't really go into actual stuff, and I still need to catch up on Clone Wars. I've been going slowly, but the problem is the slowly part.
And create avenues for our TX-130s to move and respond freely to active threats. Over there, the turbo tanks following behind our gunships to move in behind everything else once they arrive. We will need them to provide defense from exterior attack. I don't under overlapping fire report for our forces once they re-engage the Empire.
He continued.
Aye, sir.
Okay, I know this is kind of funny. Just calling them the Empire instead of the Imperium. I just read like, wait, but Palpatine hasn't taken... Oh, yeah, no, they're calling it an Empire because it's the Imperium. It is an Empire. It just threw me off for a second there, which admittedly is probably not surprising to anyone considering I keep calling the Empire the Imperium and the Imperium the Empire back and forth constantly because it's literally just a fancier spelling of Latin word in 40K because our words are fancy. They have an I at the beginning. It's not an empire, it's the Imperium.
Empire.
He continued.
Aye, sir. And the Jedi?
Neo asked after a brief pause.
My order.
Wait, what was the guy's name? Fan, did you actually call this guy Mayo?
And the Jedi?
Neo asked after a brief pause.
My order shall remain
Neo,
airborne and
or
will move in
Neo,
as strike forces
not
to
Mayo.
address anything unexpected or dangerous that may crop up. Once we have the entire exterior of the cathedral under our control, we shall deploy in force for the actual storming of their fortress. This way, we will never be too far from where we are needed, and will lead the charge past their final defensive structures.
K-Kaj explained to the commander, who nodded and snapped a quick salute before turning to relay the orders. Even with his plan now being acted out, the Angry Jedi Master was wary and reminded himself to remain flexible.
Yeah, the guy's competent, but he's still overestimating his troops because he's underestimating what Space Marines are probably going to do.
There was no telling how the Imperials might react or what plans they themselves may already have in the works. He sensed great danger approaching, but for some reason he did not feel that danger was coming from the Basilica alone, nor the surrounding towers where the Space Marines had potentially deployed themselves.
Oh, is he feeling the... Oh, he's feeling the Unleashed Psyker having fun.
He turned his eyes away from where the fight
Is
would
it
be
going to be
occurring
red?
and faced them towards the horizon. Distantly, very distantly, his alien eyes could see another storm beginning to form there, punctuated by streaks of red lightning, which menaced him even from so many miles away.
Yep. Said Inquisitor is drawing Jedi attention, which they were hiding from constantly. If he can feel that, Palpatine can probably feel that. Because Palpatine is actually paying attention because it amuses him. What is his reaction going to be to this? That could be interesting.
How long before that storm reaches us, Commander Neil?
He asked.
Wait, what?
Suddenly. The clone,
Reaches? I
who
thought it was
busy
standard.
communicating
We're
the
not
attack
moving.
plan, looked up and then stared in the same direction as the Jedi Master, withdrawing a pair of electro-binoculars to look through a moment later.
Oh, and I'm being corrected that it wasn't actually the Wyler. Sorry, Tar, because Wylers are apparently multiple now. Tar is the one who I thought he was feeling because he was the Psyker. But this is just the Daemon storm, the red lightning. Although I thought the Psyker was in the same location going off. Although that might not have happened at this point. I'm not entirely sure how they compare time-wise.
He shrugged.
Maybe 45 minutes to an hour from now. Storms are common here on Axum, sir. According to the troopers we are relieving, they've already had plenty of rain today alone.
He informed the Jedi General. Coleman nodded warily,
But
eyes still on that encroaching, twisting sneer of black clouds and distant thunder.
so the storm is
Yes,
moving.
Perhaps. Let us continue the talks, Commander. I want to be invading that final fortification well before we are rained on.
He said. Neo nodded sharply.
Right away, sir. We'll get this place secured on the double.
And apparently people are reminding me that Tar sent the Daemon host to the Basilica. Actually, I completely forgot about that part. So yeah, that would be a problem. And is probably one of the few things that would force the Space Marines to fight something other than the Republic, because Daemon, if there's one thing the Imperium is pretty good about, it's fuck all y'all, we're killing the demons first. Sometimes. Usually they take priority. In fact, it's actually one of the few times where you've seen people in Canon 40K make alliances with aliens and Xenos, and sometimes not even break them, because fuck said demons. Unless it's Slaanesh, in which case don't use that phrasing. It's probably not what they want to hear, or explicitly what they want. We're going straight to Lazarus? Ooh.
Saint Lazarus grit his teeth, pain shooting up through his various injuries as he was carried atop several shoulders and hands. His armored body ferried in an ocean of desperate humanity as he was moved within one of the adjoining chapels within the massive basilica. He had initially been brought into the temple by the strength and support of the Canoness alone. Yet it had not taken long once crossing into the building for his state to be noticed by many others. They took it upon themselves to lift him high, moving him through the growing press. The basilica, empty moments before, was now rapidly filling with a chaotic mob of wounded soldiers and survivors from all branches of the Imperium, all who remained free on this cursed planet.
That's actually something that I find interesting. How many troops were they taking captive on the Star Wars side? Because before Windu went crazy, he was talking about some of that stuff, and other Jedi were also indicating it. I wonder if they do actually have camps of people from the Star Wars side who might have even been taken off planet at this point. I don't think anyone has been exfiltrated for that to happen. But if Fan just randomly said, okay, and this happened in the background, maybe we can get concentration camp Imperium side. I doubt it, because I don't think Fan's leaning to that way, because it seems like it would be a de-escalation, but it would be an interesting way to see how that plays out. Considering Palpatine's probably about to pull some bullshit, because, I mean, it's Palpatine. He is always about to pull some bullshit.
But large though the building was, it was never intended to house so many as now sought to enter, and that was becoming obvious to see. Medical beds were laid out into hallways. Soldiers scrambled and pushed through the crowds, running to engage some kind of struggle or fight happening deeper within the basilica. And the pristine white floors of the Emperor's home were soon tarnished.
Wait. They wouldn't be sending reinforcements to the virus bomb, because the only person who went there afterward was the Canoness herself, who already moved on from him. So it's not that, and there's no reason anyone else would come. So there must be fighting outside the basilica somewhere else then. Unless there's another front that Fan is about to bring up to us, which could still be the Gene Stealers. Hobbit, you're pointing out that this battle has gone on for less than 24 hours. "24 hours. When do we say the start of Axum was? 24 hours. Fan has written probably enough words to go longer than the actual time frame of the battle. God damn. That's actually impressive and really cool.
Tarnished and dirtied by blood, ash, and whatever else the myriad forces of mankind dragged onto them. Tech priests and sisters of the noble orders of the Hospitlar moved through and between the many others, often suspended above the hordes of the Imperial survivors on hovering harnesses or spider-like mechadendrites, using the devices to stalk above the pressed masses of people and beds. Those who had no such augmentations stepped on the posts and sides of medical beds or climbed around shrines and ornate pillars, their sometimes bare and sometimes booted feet lithely balancing along as their hands and arms held assortments of data slates or clusters of medical necessities. Some space was eventually made for Lazarus, given his status, but he hardly believed he deserved it after the failure he had just suffered at the walls. It simply did not matter how many they killed or tried to force back. The Republic was becoming more numerous by the second.
Just pointing out in the chat, Burb of Judgment said, in a Q&A, Fan mentioned he thought Axum would be 10 to only 15 episodes max. Yeah, but also early on in Q&A, he also said that Lazarus would be a side character, and 1313 was just like a random, hey, let's see what Krieg's doing, and they weren't going to matter. Yeah, I think his plans changed a bit. I don't mean changed. I mean they chained. They chained together, and honestly, it's probably better for it. God damn.
And their weapons of war, from tanks to airships, grew more varied by the minute. The faithful of the machine god and the emperor alike were trapped, clustered around each other like a swarm of drowning rats, taking up the last aired space on their rapidly sinking ship. And worse yet, the new saint had no idea how to even begin to save them. So many reached for him, so many prayed for him, so many now depended on him, and the final words of Ishara Ordain hung heavily in his mind.
Oh.
He had a duty to these people, not to win the battle, but merely to survive it. But what could be done now? There was very nearly no way out, and what ways there were.
And therein is the rub, to be a fancy phrasing on that one. She didn't tell him to fight, she said survive. Because they're in a sight of a holy building when there's a demon unleashed approaching. Yeah, I think firing on the building when the demon's around them is probably safer for the people in the building.
Well, he could not see them, though he held to the faith that they did exist. The Emperor would not abandon them. The Master of Mankind would not have returned Lazarus from death only to fail. Would he?
I mean, yes. But also, it wouldn't be his intention for you to fail. That's just a possibility that could still exist.
Heretical thoughts made him resent his position all the more. He was no major, no saint. Saints did not have doubts.
I mean, technically, he is also not a major anymore because that was stripped from him. Not like it matters, though.
Their faith was absolute. He could not help but feel an imposter throughout all of this, and yet he dared not show it. He owed the men and women around him too much for that. Before space had been created, Lazarus had spent this time doing what he could to ease those who came close, blessing the faithful who pleaded for it, taking ash and sweat from his own face and brow, and rubbing it into vaguely avian forms on the foreheads of the various humans who looked up towards him with eyes begging salvation. He voiced paltry blessings to each, and, impotent as they were, the words were drowned out more often than not by the heavy cacophony all around him. Orders, panic, prayers, all wrung from the high walls and vaulted ceilings of this holy place, echoing in spaces which had previously been meant for choir music and sermons. However, after a time, Leandra thundered at those around him, demanding space be made, and even divested of her powered armor, her lungs clearly did not lack for the strength, and by the force of her voice alone, the press around them was made to obey. Soon, after they were through the chapel, the unspoken question of where they were taking him was answered without words needing to be spoken. His body was carried up and up, through stairway passages, into an area of the Basilica of Salvation which had not yet been filled, or at least not completely. There was much more space here, and he could see the reason why right away. Medals, pauldrons of elaborate design, fine augmentations and gold-plated lasguns, humming plasma weapons, and sparking power swords and fists.
Armory?
All around him, the saint saw commanders, captains, and a few wounded mages who had joined with the retreating forces.
Did he say mages? What?
Commanders, captains, and a few wounded mages who had joined with the retreating.
Mages? Does he mean magos? It's probably what he means, because I don't think they call psychers mages here ever. It's probably magos.
Forces on their way to the Basilica, or who had been in some position around the besieged temple. The thought that other men, so much more like himself, were being forced into the press downstairs made the teeth he had left in his mouth grit together painfully. But he understood the necessity of it. How could they plan their way out of this while trapped in the cacophonous press that was to be found downstairs?
Only something big was coming down.
None of the command staff here were silent, all speaking amongst each other, and half of them even properly discussing solutions in place of bemoaning their pessimistic outcome. He was not stopped here, however, taken further and further until he was laid onto a medical bed within the private shrine of the Canoness Superior herself. The sacred space was oddly austere, the room being barren, save for a few prayer mats, some select icons of the faith which hung from the walls, and a single banner of the Sisterhood which hung above the winged doorway. In the center of it all, a white marble carving of the Emperor himself stood tall, one which seemed half completed, the vagueness of their god emerging from the white stone like the semblance of a man bursting from an ocean of pale white milk.
Does that mean that the Canoness was, in her free time, carving the Emperor? I mean, technically, historically, that is something people in monasteries have done, so sure, why not? Also, Josh Tompkins mentioned that it was magers, not mages or magos, although a few other people have said magos as well. Magers makes a lot more sense, though, because it's more militarum.
The saint was not alone within, even after those who had helped carry him in were curtly dismissed by the Canoness commander, who had been serving as his bodyguard throughout the battle. Leandra stood away from him after the others had departed, kneeling before the statue of the Emperor, her hands clasped together, head lowered in prayer and supplication as another three sisters entered the room and approached his bed, crowding around Lazarus. Their hands reached for him, peeling away his armor and then sackcloth robes to expose his many new but minor injuries. They paid his modesty little heed, chanting prayers all the while, even as he raised meager and ignored protests. Distracting himself from their ministrations, the saint looked around. Only the lit wall scones provided any substantial light, but it was enough to—
Wait, scones? Is that what they're called? I thought they were called sconces. Maybe I've just been hearing it wrong the entire time. It's one of those things I'd never had any of and ever dealt with, so I honestly don't know how to say it. I've only ever read the word.
to see by. Already waiting within was a tall woman who he assumed to be—
Oh, and this is what it would look like. It was the vague outline coming from the rock. Actually looks pretty cool. Kubik did a good job on this one to get exactly as Fan described it.
Commissar Jane Leros, the one who had saved all of their lives with her time.
And the one who had the weapon and maybe skull of Saint Gygax. I was going to say Gygax for a second. Saint Gyax. Gax, whatever. Gix. Every time I hear his name, I keep going Gary Gygax. And I know that's wrong, but it's where my mind goes every time.
Timely intervention, and whose sudden arrival had turned the Republic back, even if only temporarily. She had divested herself of her power fist and other weapons, save for a bolt pistol which hung at her waist, the other items dangling from a steel hook on the wall near where she was leaning. She was holding what appeared to be a skull in her hands, the severed head cleanly flensed and lightly luminous in the twilight of the chamber. Lazarus very nearly missed the other figure standing behind the statue of the Emperor, looming at the intersection of several shadows. There stood a leering, red-eyed soldier whose face was encased in a full ceramite mask.
Red-eyed?
A Tempestus Scion,
Oh!
Lazarus realized, before amending
Forgot they
his
came with her.
observation. No, not just a mere soldier of that elite corps, but none other than a Tempestor Prime. Or at least, that was what his regalia and uniform seemed.
Is this the same Tempestor that caught him when he was falling earlier, or is it a different one? Honestly, it's been so long, and I thought the one that caught him moved on to a different position, closer to the ambush where the Inquisitor is.
To indicate the Thunderbird emblem he wore on his dark armor, and the muted colors of dark red, deep blue, and dull gray which formed the checkerboard pattern on his shoulder cape marked him out as a Calambian. And the very same man who had saved Lazarus' life at
no,
the
it was
Battle
the
of
right one
Bloody
then.
Bridges.
Okay.
The Prime, known as Aloysius Cinder. Then he spotted the other hospital bed in the corner of the room in place of a cross from his own.
Oh.
A
They're just bringing all the high-ranking cripples here, aren't they? Oh, dear God.
Natural darkness seemed to linger there, at least until Lazarus noticed that there were obstructions on the wall scones, black knives embedded into their sides at odd angles,
Knives?
creating strips of shadow which all converged on that corner.
Really? Really? Someone went out of their way to give very specifically cut shadows over him? I'm assuming it's Samael at this point. Unless it's someone else, which would actually be very fascinating.
Hiding its two inhabitants in flickering, wavering darkness.
Probably who I think it
A
is.
small woman and an enormous man
Yep.
were there. The
Samael
man sitting
and
on the
Hecate.
bed, his back leaned against the wall. It was not clear if the man was alive, for he seemed unmoving, and he was clearly badly wounded,
indeed.
dried and clotted blood leading the way to the bed from across the otherwise clean floor.
And yeah, Hobbit, this is definitely an Avenger Assemble moment. Except it's way more like Avengers! Hobble! That actually seems way more accurate right now.
The man was wearing a dark trench coat which spilled over the sides of the medical bed. The woman wearing something similar, but much smaller. She was helping to break.
Okay, normally I wouldn't say this, but Kubik, because of where you have her hand set up, I know it isn't this, but it looks like she's taking a selfie of them. I know that's not the intention. I know that's not what's happening, but it's what it looks like.
Faced the larger man against the wall, herself perched to his side, one hand pressed against his chest to keep him steady, while the other held a wicked curved blade of the same kind as those embedded into the sides of the scones. She leered around, a guardian's air about her, as she held the weapon out threateningly, as if warding away any who might see, forcing them to keep their distance. The woman was of blonde hair and pale
So she doesn't have the
complexion,
mask on.
and her eyes seemed to glow a malevolent red as they swept back and forth across the
With
room.
psych or power, sure, why
These
not?
two Lazarus did not know at all, but he could remember them from the battle, fighting against the Jedi. He had not witnessed the full conclusion of that battle, but judging from the slumped and still form of the black-haired man, it had not gone well. Whoever they were,
Well, no, but honestly, it probably turned out better than it had any right to for the Imperium.
being allowed into this room meant something for certain, even if he did not yet know what. Lazarus bided his time, as he could not speak or address any of them with any dignity, while the sisters Hospitaller who surrounded him did their work, rebandaging his wounds, stitching him shut where he was bleeding, jamming tools into his mouth to yank his broken teeth and replace them with quick, augmentative replacements, and painfully removing the remains of his mechanical arm and leg, leaving him lopsided and out of balance. They worked quickly, however, and in only a handful of minutes they were wrapping his body back within his sackcloth raiment, daubing his bruised skin with sacred oils, and whispering blessings over him. Once their work was completed, they stood up and began backing away while bowing and facing him, bending multiple times every couple of steps until they were outside the doors, which closed. Lazarus was not sure he would ever grow accustomed to that kind of reverence,
Probably not.
groaning as he pushed himself upright with his remaining living arm and sat, crippled but alive, in the medical bed. He was surprised that they had made no attempt to heal the other man against the wall, perhaps realizing that he was already dead, or perhaps not wanting to come anywhere near his red-eyed guardian.
Probably the second one. And frankly, for anyone who knows what she is, that's a very smart choice. Also, he may or may not be all right. I'm not sure how badly wounded for his constitution it is, because I'm just making the assumption he's an Inquisitor that's a failed Space Marine with a failed Evisor with psychic powers. There's probably some other bullshit going on.
He did not have much time to contemplate it, however, since the moment the Hospitaller departed, 3 of the others in the room approached him. Leandra rose from her prayer, forming the sign of the Aquila over her breast, as Jane pushed off from the wall and straightened her hat and burnt overcoat.
Jane? Oh,
All the while,
yeah.
Cinder turned to fully
Leroy
face
Jenkins.
Lazarus and sauntered
equivalent.
out from beneath the shadows, stepping like a cat in the Commissar's own wake. The saint gave them a wan smile, feeling his guts clench as he realized that, once more, he was playing center to a group of figures who far outstripped him. How, by the Emperor's golden teeth, had he ended up in this situation?
Not dying.
Saint Lazarus?
Spoke the Commissar, her voice clipped, but not unpleasant.
I do not believe we have formally been introduced. I am Commissar Colonel James Lee Ross, at your...
I know Fen was using AI voice changer earlier for the alien. It sounded fine for that and for the clone, but I don't think it works right now.
Eternal service.
She greeted with a stiff salute.
Yeah, I'm actually doubling down on that one. I think his own acting was more, just more.
Lazarus raised an eyebrow at those words. He had not expected that to be her claimed title, not by a long shot. Commissar Colonel? Isn't that kind of function a little unorthodox? He pried, trying not to show the difficulty he was having in finding his sitting balance with only one arm and one leg. She smirked subtly at him and gave a brief nod.
It can appear that way, Holiness. But, like you, I only achieved my current rank after this battle had already commenced. I have been given this promotion in recognition of my efforts and successes concerning the preservation of our main forces at the slaughter of the spires.
Oh.
She reported, hands behind her back
Wait.
and legs spread.
Preservation of? I thought there was more complete losses. Oh, maybe they didn't do as bad as I thought.
Her back straight as a rod. Still,
Hey.
I can't remember the last time that rank was earned by anyone at all. Tales of Commissar gone and his ghost aside, I had thought its existence was no more than a soldier's rumor, not an actual option for command. The saint said, softly questioning the legitimacy of her claim.
And yet, it is my rank.
She asserted.
I mean, to be fair, his rank is a lot more crazy at this point. He has been demoted from actually part of the military to saint, so take your pick. He has no right to say anything at this point.
Lazarus shrugged his shoulders and sighed, suppressing a wince as an agonized sting wrung its way through his injured, missing arm. Seems like I'll see every strange exception play out before I'm sent back to the Emperor's side.
Yep.
Lazarus suggested, indicating for her to relax with his remaining arm and almost falling over for the effort. She did so, but relaxed her stance only slightly.
Well, with all due respect, Your Holiness, the promotion was handed down to me directly by Marshal Dovin approximately 8 minutes before the fall of Central Command. So, I'd say that my elevation is less of an exception than your own rise to the rank of Major.
She offered, face stern, but tone hinting at the giant
Oh, she still doesn't know he lost that because technically he was taken from that position. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Major's still perfectly functional, but...
vibe being no more than that. Lazarus felt a twitch ring across his face. This Commissar Leros had an effective way of showing how much she already knew without leading the conversation fully into it. The recently anointed saint nodded his head and resolved to change the subject, not intending to mince words with a political officer. Fair
Smart
enough,
move.
Commissar Colonel. I did receive reports about the Battle of the Azure Spires, but what I was given was sparse and sometimes contradictory. He began to say.
The reports of someone shouting, Jane Lee Ross, and then running into battle were completely exaggerated. That never happened.
Slaughter, Holiness. It was a slaughter.
She corrected without hesitation, strong face hardening as she
Also, I'm just telling myself right now she has a Vox box in her throat because that just makes it sound better, in my opinion.
spoke. How so? What happened? He asked without missing a beat.
It's hard to work out the details. However, what is clear is that the Jedi preempted our route. They knew we would come to the aid of the Basilica, and they placed themselves in and among the surrounding spires around the primary road of Silver Central Avenue, which created the route we were using to travel.
Lee Ross began to report. Ah, they ambushed you there? Lazarus asked, but she shook her head.
Not as such, Holiness. They did not confront us directly until after the slaughter was completed.
The Commissar corrected again. Then how? Lazarus began to ask.
It was the spires themselves. The witches found a way to drop and direct their descents. They dropped the city on us, Holiness. By the time we understood the nature of the attack, the spires were already falling on us, and we were trapped by the organization of our own columns. We lost a lot of tanks and a lot of good people before we even saw a single Jedi.
Jane Lee Ross explained. Lazarus was taken aback by that. He had been under the impression that he and his had gotten the worst of the fighting. It looked like he had several assumptions to correct on that matter. I see. How on Terra did you make it out of there with so many people?
They're going to start talking about Gax, and this is what I'm actually very curious about, how that's going to play out.
he asked, but again she shook her head.
Not so many, Holiness. Figures are hard to collect right now, but I reckon only about 30% of our main force managed to escape the spire attack.
Okay, that is, to give an idea why I'm reacting this way to the number of 30% survival. In most modern militaries now, if you suffer 10% losses, you consider it an absolute blowout loss. You have lost. You need to run, because those are horribly huge numbers. Mostly because in terms of actual fighting, there's so many people involved, so many layers of administration and custodial work and logistics, so much logistics. The 10% of just the fighting force includes everyone. So that's a huge number. Now, theirs is probably just straight up people who have no choice to fight. And the numbers probably don't mean as much in the Imperium because, you know, absolute obscene levels of bravery and forced by people like her. But at the same time, that is still horrific numbers.
Jedi plot was largely a resounding success. And then they fell on us directly. Only Jedi, no toy soldiers. Their force was comprised of thousands of psychers, all armed with power swords, all trained for what they proceeded to do to us.
The saint breathed in deeply, knowing that a similar fate was gathering outside of the basilica, priming itself to fall upon them just as ravenously. A whole army of thousands of psychers, and this time, they would not be alone. How was the Imperium supposed to stand against that kind of enemy? So how did you escape? Did the Jedi let you flee? He asked, and she scoffed lightly in response.
We would all be dead, or the prisoners of the Jedi, had they been fully successful. No, Holiness. They showed us no mercy. Many acknowledge my coordination and quick actions afterward as factors in our survival, but the truth of the matter is that we were saved by the same man who stopped the spires from falling on all of us.
Oh, so that actually does tell me about the time frame. Because I was under the impression by the time the spires fell, it was roughly the same time period that Command was absolutely annihilated by the Jedi. But it seems like if she was promoted before that happened, this actually happened quite early into the battle, and the assassination was later. Sorry, time frames are a little... Fan plays with them pretty frequently, so they don't always line up as I thought. So when they had Command initially, this is something that they would have known about. The only reason I'm bringing this up is I'm trying to figure out at what point did Tar specifically, lose his information sources, because I think he's working on incomplete information of what the battle looks like, because he thinks he needs to destroy the planet to give the Imperium a reason to believe that the Star Wars side is an actual threat. But it sounds like the Star Wars side is actually fighting pretty well. If they died within minutes of her being promoted, he probably never got that information. It'll probably come up, but also I just realized my entire chat is just coming up with other ways to do Lord of the Rings, but Star Wars versus 40K version. What the hell, man? I'm going to have to reread through this later.
Who spent himself and his life saving everyone he could before it was too late.
Jane admitted, letting the words hang in the air before lifting the skull and making every eye squint as she did. The luminous skull was not so bright as she held it clutched in her hand, yet looking directly at it prompted the same response from everyone, each Imperial feeling a sudden pressure meeting their minds. To Lazarus, it felt like wind being blown right into his face, right up against his eyes.
Also in the chat, Fan just chimed in that Farnus is now Frodo. Which one is Sam, though? Actually, I think we all know who Sam is in this case.
Though there was no billowing movement, no sign of force or physical presence. The skull itself was odder than he had thought upon first spotting her holding it. In the center of its forehead was a patch of bone which seemed to have been smoothed and calcified into the semblance of a quartz crystal, and from its streaked veins of the same material, creating a languid, wavy starburst of clear gemstone which spread its tendrils across the breadth of the bone it had grown into.
What is that?
Canoness Leandra growled, her hand falling to the pommel of her sword, which...
Yeah, Fan, I think your voice acting is better than the AI on this one.
She still wore around her waist in a tertiary holster she had gotten for herself. The Commissar turned to look at her at the words, apprehension tightening her expression somewhat.
This is Saint Gan Krell, Holy Sister. He was a Chimera Psyker under the command of Commissar Terrandor. It was he who sacrificed his life holding of the spires. My squad and I tried to save him, but by the time we had him in our custody, he was already dissolving. What I hold here is all that remains of Krell. But, as you can feel, what remains is much more than just his skull.
Jane Lee Ross explained as she
Psyker,
held the item up before Lazarus.
Huh. So he dissolved into Force Ghost, but left behind part of himself. That's actually unique. I don't think that's ever happened partially.
He was a witch.
Leandra snarled.
Yeah?
And this feels like heresy. He was not anointed. You have no right to call him a saint.
The Canoness added angrily, and Jane's face scrunched in response, but her discipline did not break.
The irony of a Commissar having to hold her tongue. And then actually doing it! Things you do not usually see in 40K. Wow.
With respect to the Holy Sister, he died speaking the Emperor's words. He saved us all multiple times. First, by standing against an army of true witches and apostates, holding back their schemes and victory, and then countless more times in the battle that followed.
The Commissar explained. Elaborate. Ordered Lazarus, and she nodded.
What you are feeling now, the Jedi can feel it as well, but several hundreds of times more powerfully.
She added, now lowering the skull and resuming her rigid posture.
I can fully and personally attest to seeing this man kill at least 22 Jedi, even after his death. Without his Aegis, who would never have made it back to Central Command, who would not have been able to drive the Jedi away, I would never have been promoted, and we would never have been able to reach you and drive the Republic back.
The Commissar stated sharply. Leandra gave a sour expression and seemed to be about to protest the words further, but Jane continued to speak.
If Gan Krell is a heretic, then heresy has saved this basilica and all the faithful within it. I do not believe that to be the case, so I cannot agree that Gan Krell is a heretic. He went above his duty, and because of it, we can all stand here and debate his sainthood at all.
I mean, to be fair, he's a Chimera Psyker. And yeah, I know when I say that, it's like, wait, he's a Primaris? I thought he wasn't a Space Marine. Yeah, I know, they reuse the word. It's annoying. But he was a Psyker in the regular, normal human side who went up and did something that some of the actual Primaris Marine Psykers would be like, well, shit, dude. Hell, I think he outdid some of the things that the Librarian was pulling off. Nope, actually, scratch that. He was explicitly overpowering more Jedi at once than the Librarian did. So yeah, that counts.
If not for him, we would be kneeling on the ground in the face of Republic blasters, or being thrown as corpses from the sides of the city.
She concluded. Leandra did not look pleased, barely placated in fact, but she did not object or speak quickly enough to stop Lazarus from speaking first. Well said, Commissar. I'll not turn away any ally right now. Not when we are being ground beneath the Republic's pale heel. Not when we need all the help we can get. He said, but the severe look Leandra threw his way had him suddenly sweating. The last thing he needed was an internal conflict, and so he thought quickly.
Fan, you are not helping the entire accusations that they are an item and that this is the ship. Because just that. He's like, oh, hey, Lazarus didn't back you up. And she immediately turns to stare at him. Ooh. Oh, I swear, if there's ever a downtime moment shown between them, Fan is going to have so much unintentional innuendo brought up. Not because he's even going to write in there, but because everyone will read into it that way at this point.
However, he added a moment later, perhaps it is best if we turn Gaxian's remains over to the Sisterhood for now. Maybe he is merely a great hero of the Imperium, Or maybe I am not the only saint to be found on this planet.
Yeah, the
Whatever
only
the
living
case
one.
may be, I believe the brides of the Emperor are the most qualified to determine what is the Emperor's will. Are we agreed? He offered to the two women, who even then seemed to glare at one another, Leandra's scowl being the most open of the two. Neither seemed entirely pleased by his words, but they also seemed less likely now to suddenly begin fighting amongst themselves, and with a stiff nod, Jane Leros held out the skull to the sister, who hesitantly reached out and took it. After a brief moment's consideration, the Canoness left the room with the head of Gan Krell in hand, saying nothing more about her intentions as she left. Jane seemed stressed by the entire series of actions, but Lazarus waved at her to calm down. Have faith, Commissar Colonel. All will be well. He assured her,
You sure about that?
and after a breath's span of stillness, she seemed to relent with a slightly less stiff nod of her chin.
Of course, Holiness.
She affirmed. Good, good. Well, now that we are acquainted, let me offer a word of thanks before we move on to the planning of this defense, said Lazarus, reaching down with his remaining arm to grip the side of the bed to keep himself steady. I thank you, Commissar Colonel Jane Leros. Without your intervention, I doubt I or the Canoness would still be in any position to debate anything.
True.
And I extend the same thanks to you, Tempestor Prime Cinder.
Oh yeah,
You
bringing him
saved
in.
my life at the Battle of...
Oh yeah, he's just been there this entire time watching this. This is one of the few times I'm going to say something I normally disagree with. I would like if Fan just broke the character positioning right now, so we jump out of Lazarus's head right into Cinder's to just watch him, this entire little cat fight going on right now, because I think that would be hilarious. The irony of someone going like, talking back to a commissar and surviving. Haven't seen that before. I think that would be hilarious to me. I don't think it would happen, but it'd be funny.
I did not get the opportunity to thank you before, so let me do so now. Without you, I'd be less than a smear 100 miles below the Basilica.
Oh yeah, they're tall.
Lazarus offered to them, gesturing towards the, till now, silent leader of the Calambian Thunderbirds. The tall man nodded once, almost robotically. Doing my duty, nothing more, were his succinct words, and after another pause to see if he would add any more, Lazarus nodded somewhat awkwardly and coughed. All right. Well, if anyone has any ideas as to how we can stave off the Republic's next assault, I'm all ears, he said sheepishly.
And now we have who's going to jump in.
Do not.
Said a rasp
Do
from the
not?
darkest corner of the room.
Oh, we do not fight off their assault. Okay. I'm honestly glad Samuel made it out of the battle, just because he's such an interesting character.
The others turned to regard the deep, raspy voice, and, to Lazarus's deep surprise, it was coming from the man he thought dead. Sam, don't, the woman at his side began to say, but he shook his head at her before she could finish, straightening a little, but not rising.
Duty calls, heck. Not my place to be silent when decisions are being made.
He said.
And who are you? How did you even manage to be allowed in here?
Asked Commissar Leros, and in response,
Oh, if he has the rosette on him, this is actually going to be funny. He's like, hey, you know how I'm here and everyone else is fine with it? Yeah. Hi. Just the reveal of Inquisitor. Sorry, this actually is about to amuse me entirely.
the man gave her a tombstone smile.
My name
Casey
is
looks near
Samuel
dead.
Weiler, Inquisitor of the Zektek Triumvirate.
The large man claimed.
That's the second time the Zektek has been mentioned. And I'm pretty sure we've seen the other member of it as well. But I do not remember anything about her. Just that she was looking for Weiler. She was looking for a Weiler. I was assuming Tar because of the troops, and that doesn't seem to be Samuel's style. Huh. Also, considering the chat is all talking about harems and shipping right now, just going to throw some fuel on the fire. How many people ship Hecate with Samuel versus Obi-Wan?
reaching into his coat and shakily withdrawing something on a chain. An inquisitorial rosette. Aloysius Cinder went down to one knee right away,
Yeah.
his helmet authenticating the validity of the rosette in seconds, and Commissar Leros snapped a new salute his way, her posture stiffening. Lazarus
Don't mind
could
the
not
corpse.
but marvel, wondering what he should do in his state. But before he could make any gesture, the man waved.
Oh yeah, because he can't go down to one knee because he only has the one. That shouldn't make me laugh, but it kind of does.
Waved their postures away with his free hand.
Rise, relax. We stand on the cusp of defeat, so there's little time for the pleasantries of ceremony.
He said, forcing the words out through a paling face, clearly not holding up from his injuries very well.
I'll break it down easy for everyone. The Basilica is lost. The planet is lost. We need to organize some way to evacuate. I doubt more and more that the self-proclaimed War Master ever intended to hold this place properly when he set forces down here. Thought at first that perhaps he was playing some grander strategy. And maybe he is. But if so, it involves the sacrifice of our position here, and potentially all of our personnel, to whatever that cause is.
The Inquisitor began to explain. Lazarus felt a fire and tightness spike through his chest and guts. He grit his teeth tightly, barely holding himself back from an outburst as the words sank in. "That's unacceptable," he said into the pause. "Lord Bakarion can't just toss us away like that."
Lord Bakarion? I'm assuming that was the... I don't remember the name of the captain of the ship that did throw them down. Threw the Space Marines down, so I don't think that's the case. I do not remember who that is, and I'm assuming they're probably dead for some reason.
It's... Lazarus began to
Typical?
sputter.
It's borderline heretical.
The Inquisitor said, nodding his head.
Trust me, Saint Lazarus. I know. I have no intention of dying here.
The Inquisitor acknowledged the saint. Well, that makes it official then.
And letting everyone here die with me. Besides, whatever he wishes to achieve, it clearly involves replacing a good amount of our own loyalist special forces. The intentional loss of Kriegers, Calambians, and Cadians, to say nothing of the rest stationed on this planet.
The huge man explained.
So, according to him, this isn't just Weiler killing people off. This would be the Militarum War Master. And Fan is in the chat saying he's not been on screen yet. So apparently I'm not just forgetting him. He's been mentioned, but never actually on screen. So they intentionally put a lot of people who were dissidents over here and then left them. Kind of like they took a lot of civilians and left them on Tatooine. For what purpose, though? Because Weiler doesn't seem to be in on the planning phases. So is this a Weiler... I need to clarify. A tar plant through the Militarum? Or is this something else? Honestly, there's not nearly enough information to play it out. And it's entirely possible that he actually didn't make that decision and Tar did, for all we know. Because it seems to be closer to what his plan is of building up the forces against the Star Wars side by having this horrible loss here. And maybe getting rid of a few people who are in Tar's way.
Shaking his head with a trembling sigh.
The only purpose I can deduce for that madness being committed intentionally is to clear the upper echelons to make room for something else.
Or just political bullshittery, because that does happen in 40K as well. Also, Fox the Scheming. You mentioned hello to thou. Fun fact, a group of weasels is called a bogle. Boggle? Boggle. Like Google. Yeah, so it'd be a boogle then. So you can Google a boogle of weasels to doodle while eating ramen noodle. My God. Truly, the world isn't not great enough to handle that fact.
Likely
That should make me
to
laugh.
make room for forces that are more loyal to him than to other principles of the Imperium.
He finished. Lazarus could barely.
Or it's someone who's taking the title War Master and running with it. And he's splitting off in his own mini empire from the Imperium by killing off people who would be loyalist to the Imperium, not to... Okay, so I see what we're doing here. Fan mentioned there are internal factions, but he kind of glossed them over right now because it was mostly red team versus blue team. And even Verse is kind of... They're still working together, even if they might not like each other's policies. But this seems like the first person actually breaking off and going, I got mine, we're going to go take all theirs. You leave. Because if you're putting loyalists to you in charge, you're probably not going to want to follow either of the Space Marine factions. Now, how much of this was Tar aware of and playing into? I don't actually know that one. And it could also be none or everything for all fans playing this out.
Countenance what the Inquisitor was proposing. Lord Tyrannus Macarion II, the Lord General that Davik Thune had chosen to lead the Guard, who had followed them into the galaxy, was a highly respected tactical genius.
Macarion? I wonder if that's in relation to Macarius. Probably not. It's probably just a coincidence. Yeah, this came out a year ago. I don't actually know if that would matter or not, because I know there's a new figure of Macarius. No, it's not Macarius. That's a different guy who's the Lord Solar.
How could he choose to do all of this? To abandon his own forces on a doomed posting just to clear the board?
Did
That
you know?
is outrageous, Inquisitor. If this is true, if he really chose to do this, then I'll... Lazarus
Follow
began
orders?
to growl, but a raised hand from the large wounded man halted the Imperial Saint.
You will do your duty and no more.
Ordered the voice of the Emperor, eyes intense, despite the agony clearly reflected there.
You will leave the rest to the Inquisition. If there is justice to be had, it shall be rendered by us, not by you, not by the Ecclesiarchy. Am I understood, Saint Lazarus?
The Inquisitor asserted, forcing a resigned nod from Lazarus, who reminded himself to clamp down on his opinion.
And Hobbit's reminding us that Tar early on said the planet would be sacrificed for the greater good of the Imperium. But also, leader of Blue Team appointed the guy who made the posting. How much is the Inquisition involved with the Space Marines right now? I was under the assumption that they were not fully aware of each other, or more, the Space Marine factions would not be as aware of the Inquisitor factions. But maybe that's not the case.
This man was no ecclesiarch or lord general. He was a full-blown inquisitor, and clearly the various elevations that Lazarus had been subject to in the last 24 hours meant next to nothing to the likes of him. The large man's face relaxed visibly, or at least as much as he could manage to relax it, given the massive wound in his chest.
Good. Good. If we all understand each other, that brings me to the good news. Any second now.
Samael began to explain, blood flecking his lips as he did. In that moment, the doors opened once more.
Oh.
But it was not Sister Leandra
Who else is
alone who
able to come?
re-entered. Behind her, two enormous forms, not large enough to be ogrins, but far too large to be mere men, stepped inside the austere chamber.
Who's left?
The whir of mechanical servos and the smell
Magos.
of holy anointing oils followed them inside. Eye lenses glowing, enormous bodies striding forward with a surety that proclaimed victory. Lazarus felt his eyes widen, and he suddenly wondered what he should do, even more so now than with the Inquisitor. Sure, he was now some kind of saint, but did not even saints bow before angels? They spoke, before
Space
he
Marines,
could
actual
decide.
Space Marines.
You do not need to concern yourself with the defense of this place any longer. We are evacuating you and every other citizen of the Imperium from this basilica.
Said the transhuman warrior to her right, a tall and ornate Space Marine lord. The Inquisitor sighed and laid back, and the other Marine opposite the one who had spoken turned his head towards Samael right away. The armor of the first Marine was like a walking shrine, amethyst in color, but caked in silver and gold finery. His rank, his accomplishments, and those of his chapter were written thickly over every inch of his ceramite-encased body. Lazarus felt his breath nearly being sucked out of his lungs as a realization struck him. This angel of death was a captain. And not just any Astartes captain.
Oh?
He was clearly the first captain of the chapter. His pedigree proclaimed by the sigils on his pauldron. He was a leader and lord of the first company of his brothers. Necessarily a living legend of war, a master of death, even among the Emperor's own angels. The saint saw that the other two had made to kneel, both the Commissar and the Tempestor Prime lowering themselves to the floor.
Smart
as
move.
the massive men entered, and Lazarus haphazardly went to do the same, kept from falling over by the supportive hand of Leandra as she came to stand beside him and steady his posture. But she did not kneel, and did not permit him to either, merely bowed
Reinforcing the separation of the ecclesiarchy, because she's definitely drafted him into it at this point.
her head in acknowledgement as she held the saint in place.
We are honored to receive you and the Emperor's aid now in our darkest hour.
She
Yeah, Fan, you're a much better voice actor than the AI on this one.
said, speaking for both of them. Lazarus could not but nod and keep a brave face as the other, the warrior who was not a captain, moved past the first. He was dressed in white-powered armor and strode
Apothecary?
forward to loom over the
I'm
Inquisitor,
assuming.
examining the slumped man with red lenses and reaching out. The woman beside him tensed, but a thick fist wrapped around her forearm and stopped her from moving.
Relax, Heck. I need them to get me fixed up.
Because he's a failed space marine, so they'd be closer to the physiology than a normal doctor would get.
The Inquisitor assured as he held her back.
You are Samael Weiler.
The white-clad Marine said, not
They have
truly
access to that
asking,
info.
though the wounded man nodded his head weakly.
You are badly injured. You will need a heart transplant. What is your chapter of origin?
The apothecary asked as he gently punched forward with his
I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting that information to come up. Because that could be very important. It could just be a throwaway made-up chapter the fan makes, or he could take this as a choice to name-drop someone and give us information about what's going on here. Honestly, it'd be probably the Raven Guard for what I'm expecting based on his actions, but I doubt that's what fan would go for.
extensive medical gauntlet, pointed probes entering the Inquisitor's chest and feeding information directly back into the brain of the Marine.
No. Get me an augmentative replacement. Skywatch variant. Transplants won't.
Samael Weiler began to explain.
Understood. The flesh is weak. I shall have a replacement of steel ready in a number of minutes.
Of course, he goes for a replacement from the group that actually likes the metal more. Oh my god. Why did he specifically say the Skywatch variant, though? Because they're the people who are heavily hinted to be playing at being Ultramarine successors, but are actually Magnus's, or yeah, his successor loyalists, because of their branding when they got to the Psychers among them. Yeah. That is telling in its own right.
What else do you need?
And that would also imply why Psychers like Tar would be so powerful if they're not just adopted in.
Marine said, cutting him off.
Right. Clots in my chest. organs are not doing well. Sifting a lot of burnt blood. 2 ribs are severed near my spine. Need to brace them.
The Inquisitor continued to report. The Marine...
Wait. How can ribs be severed if they're all fused together? Ooh, maybe that's part of the failed process.
Tending to him, nodding and priming several chemical treatments. Meanwhile, the first Marine approached Lazarus, his shadow falling over the Imperial Saint, eye lenses bright in the dim light.
I have been informed that you are Saint Lazarus. Is that correct?
The super soldier rumbled from on high. The former sergeant could barely find his voice to answer with. He had seen Space Marines before, during the evacuations of Zektek. But this man, and even the apothecary, were
Zektek was the planet they were evacuating, or the sector. Okay, so if they're the triumvirate, it was the triumvirate of Inquisitors leading the sector, probably. Okay.
Taller than what he was used to seeing, standing almost a foot or more higher than the Marines of the Skywatch had. Yes, I am he. The Saint managed to get past his throat, to which the transhuman nodded.
Your new augmentations will arrive soon and be connected. Once they are, you will come with me. By the time you are ready, the first of the evacuation ships will be launching back to our fortress monastery, which is holding position in orbit as we speak.
Wait.
The rest...
Wait, they're evacuating him specifically? I guess this is a more religious successor to the Iron Hands, then.
The command staff shall follow shortly after.
The Space Marine of the Tempered Hands dictated. His voice was thunder, his gaze a raw pressure, his every movement an elegant impossibility. And yet, Lazarus found the strength to shake his head in denial of the Astartes' edict. I cannot go, he said, almost coughing the words out, which prompted a curious tilt from the Space Marine's head.
I mean, he's quite literally in no shape to say no. Hell, he's in no shape to even move on his own, so it fits.
Why not?
Was the simple question he received in return. Lazarus shook his head again and took a deep breath, steadying himself and firming his resolve. The Republic is about to launch another assault. They are closing in around the Basilica even now, and I won't fail in the mission given to me, the Imperial Saint clarified.
And what mission is that?
Asked the captain. To save as many as I can, was Lazarus' stalwart response, filling the words with all the conviction he had left in his body.
So this is actually a really interesting thing that Fan is doing right now. The interpretation he's using for the Iron Hand successor, the Fist here, this is unique because among a lot of Space Marines in the Horus Heresy and after that among still loyalists, the idea of actually asking and then being told no and not immediately doing something about it is odd. Space Marines have a very storied history in 40K, and I mean storied in the sense that multiple writers have used this, where a Space Marine tells a mortal to do something, and unless that mortal is very highly placed, and Saint may or may not be highly placed depending on who's the person acting, the answer is, I'm going to kill you for not listening to me, or I'm going to do it anyway for not listening to me. There are explicit stories of even the good chapters outside of the Salamanders who actually value human life not taking shit from anyone not listening to them. Or the other end being explicitly not caring about the more mortal side. So the idea that he is actually listening and not taking offense and doing this, this is the first captain who we already heard from Lazarus' own perspective would be by necessity a living legend. That is actually really interesting that either he heavily values the religious aspect of being a saint, or he is really damn patient beyond what most Space Marines would ever get to. So honestly, I would probably go more that his chapter might be more of a religiously bent one. Usually when you hear more the flesh is weak, you go Mechanicum religious, not Imperial cult religious, though. Huh. Maybe? I could be wrong about this completely. I don't know, but I'm very curious to see how this plays out.
I won't flee while my men still fight. The Emperor did not give me back my life so that I could hold it above those of my soldiers. In the words of the Canoness, I was given back not my life, but my death. And I would be failing that if I did not risk that death doing as she commanded me, as the Emperor commanded me. He explained forcefully. The Marine leaned back and seemed to consider the words.
Actually listening to a
Lazarus felt
mortal.
like he might be crushed under his scrutinizing gaze, but after a moment or so, the enormous man nodded his helmed head, neither judging nor lauding the words.
But for a Space Marine, that is legitimately high praise. Also, considering how old he has to be to reach that, he's probably multiple centuries. I still think Orion is the oldest, unless Fan decided to change that, though.
Then who shall go first?
The Marine asked.
Leandra?
You are in command of the Basilica, yes?
The Astartes continued, and after a pause, Lazarus formed an answer, even as he began sweating beyond the demands of the room's temperature. I am. And it is my will that the wounded be taken first, beginning with the most critically injured. Command staff.
Technically, would that be Samael at this point? Actually, very well might be.
Or not. Everyone else will be needed to fight off the next assault. Lazarus found himself saying. The Marine made an odd, mechanical grating sound that suddenly had Lazarus feeling a flush in his face.
Is he laughing?
The transhuman warrior was laughing, or at least...
Because he said we need help defending the place when there's a company, essentially, of Space Marines here, yeah.
chuckling at him. Do you find my cause amusing?
Yes.
Do you think the wounded any less worthy of rescue?
I don't think it's the wounded rescue. I think it's more that you said you were needed at this point to fight.
The saint snapped, single fist clenching, but the Astartes shook his head.
We will do as you say. The wounded shall go first.
Affirmed the super soldier.
But none of your men will be required to drive off the Republic's next assault.
Said the first captain. Lazarus blinked at that. How quickly was this evacuation going to be? There was no way to corral them all into gunships and leave the surface of the planet before the Republic's next attack. Lazarus was sure of it. What do you mean?
What does he have
I realize
in
the
reserve?
first company of any Space Marine chapter is formidable. I've heard the legends, and I've seen the work of squads of Marines, even if from afar. But you will take losses.
Fan, did you do what I think you did? The first company is the Terminator Company. I wasn't entirely sure you would do that because it's the successor and they can do whatever the fuck they want, but are you dropping in freaking Terminators, man? I'm sorry. If you're actually doing that, I'm laughing my ass off on this one.
Your numbers will be dwarfed by what the Republic is gathering outside even now. The former sergeant tried to explain, but the enormous warrior merely shook his head.
The first company has not arrived to help you.
Said the captain of the first company, leaving Lazarus even more confused than before. Until the super soldier clarified himself further.
The entire chapter has written to your aid, and the Arch-Imbalancer is addressing the defense of your Basilica personally.
I thought it was a company, 100 Marines. It's 1,000. However many are surviving, under 1,000. That's a nice one, though! Which also means, yes, there would also be the Terminators and everything else!
There will be no losses. No angels shall fall before we are
And
finished.
Fan is just laughing at the chat.
Only one of us whom they will even be able to target will be the master of our chapter. And he is already dead. And rest assured, Saint Lazarus.
Wait, what?
And he whom they will even be able to target will be the master of our chapter. And he is already dead.
Because he was a dreadnought, right? I think I remember that, but it's been a while since that part happened.
And rest assured, Saint Lazarus, no matter how hard the Republic may try, they cannot kill death.
And now we're switching over to the interlude. Unfortunately, I have gone an entire 40 minutes longer than I meant to, so I'm going to have to cut this here and start with the interlude next week. But goddamn, man! He's being so straightforward. I'm almost wondering if they're not Iron Hand successors, but freaking Salamander successors who just decided to go more Mechanicus bent. Ah! Oh, God damn. I am looking forward to coming back to this next week. Unfortunately, it's part of the reason I started early this week is because I do have IRL things I have to do. Yeah, that's not something I have a choice of. Actually, I was considering not even doing this today because of a lot of other stuff coming up. A lot of driving, a lot of family stuff, and then got a lot to get done. So I'm going to be pretty freaking busy. And I still have to do all the editing of the video from yesterday. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. On the other hand, I finally have a head up on a painting commission I'm doing. This is not done in the slightest. It's from the game Feed the Kraken, and it has a few issues where I have to paint the back. And right now it's just the base layers. I don't know why, but I like base layering with speed paint and then adding on top of that, which is weird because it reactivates, but yeah, it's fun. Also tried multi-speed layers of painting for water, and it actually looks really good. As opposed to a single speed layer, which was just a little too wibbly. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And again, I still like doing coats on top of speed paint, which I know is horrible, but I kind of like how it turns out. So yeah, I'm going to go and probably, hopefully not be too late, because I think we were about an hour late already, and that's already too late. And yeah, we were supposed to meet them at 10, and then we bowed out to go a little later, so yeah. IRL stuff. More importantly, though, this was awesome. Thank you for doing this. And fan, yeah, I'll see you next week as well. Hopefully so, because honestly, I'm just really enjoying your writing, man. Thank you for doing this. I geek out a lot and I hyper fixate on some little techniques, but overall, if you ever just publish a book, man, make sure to tell me in the chat if I'm still reacting or just tag me in something because I want to know, or if anyone else just leaves comments on my videos until I finally see them because I'm oblivious as fuck sometimes. Let me know because I want to buy your writing, man. This is good. And if it's anything like that in your normal fiction or original, I want that. Unfortunately, I know you normally do a comic, and I don't know, I just never really like buying comics. Ugh. I might make an exception, but just never, they always felt too short. Personal opinion. Still like them, just too short. Either way, thanks for watching, everyone. There's a link below to Fan's video. Hit it up. I made sure to use the right one this time. Yeah. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.